Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Lettuce Head Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Became Immortal Overnight? Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. It's hard to describe to somebody the grief of losing someone close if they haven't experienced it themselves. It's hard to describe the feeling of watching someone you hold so very close die a gruesome death in front of you when you potentially had the power to stop it. Midoriya Izuku was going to be someone great. Everyone who ever met him knew that and could say so confidently. He was so selfless, so caring, and so kind to everyone he met even if they didn't deserve it. He was All Might's successor, which meant nothing to most, but so much to him. He was chosen out of everyone in the world to hold a power so formidable and to be trusted with it, to save everyone he could. He was going to be something so wonderful that the world needed. He was going to be a hero. Because Midoriya Izuku was dead. And there was no changing that. After the tragic event, the students of Class 1A were told they could return home for a couple of days if they wished, to help them grieve privately and gain comfort from those they loved. Todoroki initially didn't want to go home. He knew he would find little comfort there, knowing that his siblings were busy, and nothing about his father would bring him comfort. Todoroki imagined that he would probably pat him on the back and tell him to get over it. That it was less competition so he should be glad. Todoroki knew that was probably not what his father would say, knowing that he was trying his best to become a better person and a better father, but the bitterness he still held couldn't help but imagine it that way. It wasn't fair, he decided. Usually when something was bothering him, or there was something he wanted to talk about, he would seek out Midoriya knowing that he wouldn't mind hearing it and wouldn't judge him for what he had to say or vent about. Sometimes Midoriya even sought out Todoroki, trying to help the boy as much as he could. Todoroki used to wonder if that was secretly another quirk that Midoriya held, being able to sense when his friends needed him. But in reality, that was just the type of person Midoriya was. A good and trusted friend. But now he had no one to talk to. It had been 3 days and he found himself standing outside of Midoriya's dorm room, just staring at the locked door. Midoriya was dead. And Todoroki knew that standing there, waiting for the door to open to see a smiling Midoriya was not helping. The room was untouched, still shut from when Midoriya locked the room himself before they left for the field trip that ended in the horrific event. Aizawa-sensei mentioned that at some point Midoriya's mother would be stopping by to collect everything out of the room, but that wasn't going to be for a while. Todoroki imagined she was busy trying to sort everything else out, on top of grieving for her only son. And it wasn't going to be a fun event, emptying out your son's room of everything that represented who he was and was going to be. He imagined the pain of knowing that everything in that room lied perfectly where Midoriya left it, not knowing that he was going to die that day. That he thought he would be returning. But he wasn't, and that tore at something in Todoroki. He knew that he could speak to any of the others from his class, knowing that they were all going through the same thing, having been there and seen it happen. But he simply didn't want to. He didn't want to hear about how much everyone missed him and how horrible it was. He didn't want to hear about the what-ifs and the lost future. He didn't want to keep thinking about that one moment of Midoriya's body hitting the ground over and over again, letting him drown in guilt from knowing he could have done something to stop it. The sound of his phone ringing cut through the silence of the dorms, and Todoroki would even admit that it made him jump in surprise. He didn't expect anyone to ring him, and he didn't realize he was so lost in his thoughts staring at the wooden door. He grabbed his phone out of his pocket to see that it was his sister that was ringing. He had no idea why she would be ringing him. She only ever got in contact with him every week or so to check up on him, make sure he was okay, or if there was an emergency. He looked at the blaring phone and was almost tempted to not answer it, selfishly not wanting to deal with someone else's problem at that moment. But a part of him craved to speak to someone, to feel that comfort. Hello. He spoke as he put the phone to his ear. Shudo. His sister's voice called out. It didn't sound composed as it usually did, and it lacked the cheerfulness he's familiar with. It sounded nervous. I heard about what happened at school about your classmate. Todoroki was surprised. He knew it was something of common knowledge around the pro-heroes of what happened and what they lost, but he hadn't expected to hear from his sister about it. He was your friend, right? I'm sorry, I only just found out I didn't. His sister took a breath. Are you okay? He didn't respond immediately, not even sure what to say. It was such a simple question, but the weight of his response wasn't. He looked back at the door in front of him, knowing how useless it was to be standing there in front of it, and he could feel the cold tear that ran down his right cheek. No. I'm not. It had been 6 days since Midoriya died, and today was going to be their first day back to class, back to normality. The teachers knew that it wasn't going to be easy on the class. They knew things were going to take time, as this was the first time the students had lost one of their own. A classmate, a hero, a friend. But it was decided that getting things back to how they were might benefit them to help them slowly move on. A part of Bakugo was happy to go back. To distract him from thinking about it, 24, he had chosen to go back home when the option came up, if only to get away from everyone else. But he came to quickly regret that decision. His parents decided to give him his space and not be on his butt, as usual, especially his old hag of a mother. His father was pretty much normal, in the background asking if he was okay now and then. It reminded him of what they were like the first few days he came back from being kidnapped, where he was angry and annoyed at how useless he felt. It wasn't too far off how he felt now, but this time he lost something he wasn't going to get back. Sure, the first time he lost All Might, and despite how much everyone tells him that wasn't his fault, he still believes it was. But All Might was still alive. Still there to dish out his wisdom and advice. If he needed to talk to him, he was there. But Deku wasn't. He was so angry and so frustrated. And although his parents were trying to be supportive, there was only so much that they could take. His mother kept going on and on about how bad she felt for Deku's mum. So he came to especially regret his choice to return home when his mother decided it would be a good idea to give Deku's mum a visit, to see if she needed anything and to give their condolences. And somehow he got dragged along. He wanted to imagine that everything was okay, that it would be okay. But when Deku's mum opened the door and looked at them with painfully red eyes and misery waving off her, he couldn't take it. He stayed frozen there at the door whilst his mother sprouted on about how sorry she was and blah blah blah. He remembers hearing something about the funeral. He didn't want to be there, he didn't want to see how shitting Deku's mum looked, he wanted to pretend that it was all okay. So when she invited them in for some tea, he stormed off. He didn't care how much of a bollocking he was going to get for it. He just couldn't handle being here any longer. He didn't want to think about it anymore, he didn't want to feel anymore, he wanted to forget, he wanted to. He wanted to punch something really, really hard. And that is when he regretted leaving the dorms, where at least there was a training room he could destroy. He found himself at a nearby park. Despite there being nothing to punch, he could at least cause explosions in his hand without the risk of hurting someone. He was angry, so angry, and he liked to think that the explosions building in his hand helped release some of the emotion. UFA bastard Deku. He screamed into the sky. UFA shitty nerd. I hope you can hear me. He wasn't crying. He wasn't crying. He wouldn't be caught dead crying. UFING BSTRD. If anyone told him 2 years ago that he would be mourning Deku this much, he would have spit in their face as he laughed. And that made Bakugo hate him more. How dare he make him miss him, make him feel like this? And thinking about the fact that his mother was currently talking about Deku's funeral to his mum that would be taking place in 2 weeks, made him feel worse. Despite the kind of world they lived in and the risks of the career he was going into, Bakugo had never been to a funeral before. And never in his life would he had bet that the first one he would be going to would be Deku's. Shitty FNG Deku's. Because he had to go and get himself killed before he could prove Bakugo wrong and become a great hero. Because despite all of their history, Bakugo never knew that he would actually miss the stupid nerd. He never realized how much he relied on Deku annoying the hell out of him, frustrating him, and helping push him forward to becoming the best he could be. He never realized how much guilt he would have sitting on his chest. Part of him wanted to believe that the nerd did this just to spite him. But he knew that Deku was not that type of person. Never was and never will. No, that was wrong. There was no will be, there was no future tense when it came to thinking or talking about him anymore. And that just set Bakugo off. It felt strange to see everyone again. It had only been a couple of days, and some of them hadn't even left the dorms. But it was like everyone was hyper-aware of what was wrong, what was missing, but no one was brave to talk about it. It wasn't planned, but they had all met in the common room on the morning their classes were starting again. They were all ready to go in their uniforms, spit and span, even if their faces said differently. Uraraka hadn't enjoyed her time at home, not that her parents weren't beautifully caring and understanding, but she thinks no matter where she was she wouldn't have enjoyed her time. She was miserable. It hadn't felt like a week had passed, it felt like moments, hours. It didn't feel like enough time had passed to return everything to normal. It felt like everything was now going too fast and too slow at the same time. Her back had been turned when the attack happened, but she spun in time to see his body hit the floor next to her. Her right cheek was still bright red, raw, and so sore from where she scrubbed at it so hard, desperate to get off the blood that spattered on her face from his impact. She knows how much she scared her mum when she walked into the bathroom and caught her scrubbing at it so hard there was blood running down her face and she couldn't get herself to stop. She wanted it gone. She wanted the blood to go, but every time she looked in the mirror she could still see it. She could still feel it on her face. It burnt her. She wanted it gone like it had never happened. She knew she was too hyper-fixed on it, that it wasn't the real problem, but she found it to be the only outlet of her grief. She felt so numb like she couldn't feel properly. She felt broken. But now she had to forget. No, that wasn't right. She had to learn to deal with everything. This feels so weird, she heard Kaminari mumble to Kirishima. She didn't pay any attention to it, understanding that everyone was going to be feeling differently about what happened. Shut it! Bakugo shouted. It lacked his usual bite and sounded more frustrated than angry. She saw him shove his hands into his trouser pockets. She imagined it was to stop himself from exploding someone's face off, knowing what he was like. He did seem like he was on edge, just waiting for someone to push him. She hoped no one dared. They didn't need that today. Uraraka just wanted the day to go quickly so she could go back to grieving in isolation. She knows it's not what he would have wanted, but he wasn't there to tell her that himself, so she refused to care. She was allowed to mourn as much as she wanted to, and no one could stop that. Eventually, the class shuffled out of the dorm building, knowing that they were going to be late if they didn't. "How are you, Uraraka?" Ida asked, slowing his stride to walk alongside her. To her, he didn't seem much different than usual. He had always been slightly hard to read, with his straight face and stiff posture. But something about seeing Ida just made her want to cry. It was supposed to be her, him, and Deku. The three of them, walking to class together as they often did from the dorms. But that was never going to happen again, and that made her so distressed. She didn't even remember what they talked about the last time they walked to class together, how he was feeling, what he looked like as they did. Was his hair the usual mess, or was it one of the rare moments he had taken time to brush it properly? She couldn't remember. She didn't remember, and she wished she could force herself to. At that time she didn't know how important that moment would become, that it was going to be a last. But now it was so important, and it hurt her heart so much that she forgot. She didn't want to forget him. She feared that one day she would forget what he looked like, or simply how he used to smile so excitedly when she would listen to him rant about some strange quirk he'd discovered. And how he used to grimace slightly when someone made coffee near him cause he actually hated the smell of it. And how he used to excitedly walk to class a little faster when he knew they would be studying Pro Heroes that day. And how he used to cling to the straps of his backpack when he was nervous, and how how the list went on and on. She didn't want to forget him and how much he made her life that little bit brighter. She didn't want to have to be experiencing any of this. But she did appreciate that Ida didn't say anything as she wiped the tears from her face, instead of answering his question. Aizawa had been in the Pro Hero game for over a decade now. He had seen death. A lot. It was something that came with the territory of being a pro hero, but it never got easier. Especially when it was a student, his student. Midoriya was a self-sacrificing fool most of the time, but even then he would have never guessed this. Despite the many injuries that the kid got over his time at the school, and the many disastrous situations he found himself in, he always seemed to have some luck on his side. Aizawa knew it was more than that, and the kid fought hard to get through everything that was thrown at him. He worked hard to become the hero that Aizawa knew he would be. But that was all gone now. He would never get the chance to become that hero. He remembered so clearly what had happened in that fight. He had taken the kids on a field trip to the mountain grounds to practice on the terrain, and they were on the bus back when they got caught in the attack. Dozens of villains, he was sure it was an ambush, but there was little they could do before the other pro-heroes could arrive. He yelled at the students to stay on the bus, knowing that it was now trapped and they couldn't go anywhere on it, but as usual, they never listened. He remembers how quickly the fight ended once Midoriya hit the ground. The boy was dead before he landed, which was obvious by the hole in his chest. He would have died near immediately from the injury, and he knew that there was some comfort in that. But there was so much blood, it just poured out of the boy. He had landed awkwardly, his legs bent wrong, which just made Aizawa think about all the time he had broken his legs before whilst training. He was a mess, but the worst was the dead eyes and lost expression left on his face. It had haunted his dreams every time he had got a small amount of sleep since. He was just a boy, a child. He was 16 years old, which was nothing really. Aizawa grieved, and he would always remember the problem child that attracted all sorts of danger to himself, and he would always live with the guilt of letting it happen when the kid was under his protection. But now he had to be there for his other students. He knew it wasn't going to be an easy thing, helping them get through this, but he had no choice. This was something he had to do as their teacher, and if he was being honest with himself, it was something he wanted to do. He wanted to help these kids. He debated whether to get to the classroom early and remove the desk that would no longer be used. But it was a debate he couldn't win. If he moved it, some of the students would be sad to see it gone, to see that the lack of desks symbolized that Midoriya was never coming back. If he kept it, some students would be sad to look over at it and see the chair empty, knowing that he would never fill it again. It was a lose-lose situation that he wouldn't win, so he decided not to dwell on it. When he looks back, he wished he did get to the classroom earlier. He was lucky enough that he got to the door just as he saw his students coming up over the top of the stairs of the hallway. "Good morning, Aizawa-sensei," Ida greeted, heading the group. He nodded in response, glancing over his students. They all looked in various stages of grieving, a rainbow of different emotions. He sighed, knowing this was definitely not going to be easy. He opened the door just as the students reached him, and he could never have imagined what would greet him. Aizawa wondered if he truly was sleep-deprived, or if he finally reached a point of madness in his life that his mind started creating cruel hallucinations. Because there was no way that Midoriya Izuku was sitting at his desk, back straight, like he was ready to learn. If it wasn't for the shocked cries from the students behind him, he would have thought himself mad. He threw his arm across the door, blocking any of the students from entering and rushing the boy. He didn't yet know what was going on, but all of his years of experience told him he had to be careful. Despite the noise the class was making, the boy didn't move or even flinch. He still looked dead ahead, hands resting on the table like he was in an intense daydream. Iwaza took a step into the classroom, making sure to give a pointed stare at the students behind him. A warning to stay where they were until he was sure it was safe. He took another couple of steps closer, and the boy still didn't move. It was only then that Aizawa took full notice of him. Midoriya was still wearing his costume, the same one he died in if the giant hole in the front of it was any guess. But the skin underneath was clear, a little red and sore-looking, but missing the obvious hole that he knew was supposed to be there. There was blood all over the costume, it was soaked in it, and some still on his face and in his hair. But it was definitely less than what it was when Aizawa saw him dead. He looked as if he had been cleaned up slightly. He looked pale, so pale and tired that Iwaza wasn't sure if it was a ghost or not. He activated his quirk and he got closer to the boy, still taking each step very carefully. He did it out of precaution. He needed to know that this wasn't a cruel trick, a member of the league. Shape-shifted or someone impersonating the dead boy. But nothing happened. Midoriya didn't move. Aizawa knew that it could still easily be a trick or a trap. He knew that Midoriya's quirk didn't allow him to come back from the dead or heal himself. But he also knew that the boy was full of surprises, and he wanted to desperately hope that this was some sort of miracle. He crouched down slowly in front of the desk where Midoriya sat. This seemed to finally get the boy's attention as he locked eyes and watched Aizawa. He looked scared, tired, and so confused. "Sensei?" The boy spoke, his voice came out in a whisper, dry and raspy like he hadn't used it in a very long time. Midoriya, do you know where you are? Aizawa asked, watching him very carefully. He didn't break the eye contact as he frowned at the question. I'm. He looked so confused for a moment, frowning in frustration with himself for not knowing the answer right away to such a simple question. I'm in class. He said it like a question, like he wasn't 100% sure it was the correct answer. He looked away, staring down at his open hands on the desk as if they knew the answers he was looking for. Aizawa caught a quick look at the gloves he wore. They were holding on by a thread, having been destroyed in their last fight. Aizawa's heart almost broke watching him become so confused. He didn't want to let himself believe that this was 100% Midoriya Izuku, but a big part of him was already convinced that it was. Midoriya, do you remember how you got here? I walked. I. It was easy to see how disorientated he was. Aizawa caught the way Midoriya looked up and quickly glanced over at the mess of his classmates standing at the door. His breathing got heavier then, quicker and uneven, like he was on the brink of hyperventilating. Aizawa recognized the start of a panic attack. He turned to the doorway. Get recovery girl, Nedzu and All Might here now. He ordered at his class. He didn't care who, but he knew that at least one of them would run at the order given the chance to help. He turned back to Midoriya's mumbling, whose eyes were glazing over, looking lost as his breathing got worse. He grabbed hold of his student's hands, hoping it would help ground him, comfort him, something. He didn't miss how warm the hands were, even through the remains of the gloves. Midoriya, you need to breathe. Calm down, slow your breathing. Midoriya looked back up at him, eyes still wide and scared. I died. I was dead. Midoriya Izuku had died. He couldn't really remember exactly what happened. He couldn't remember the battle, nor the moments that lead up to it. But he knew that there was a battle. And if he focused really hard, he could see flashes almost like images of the fight. He remembers the street being completely destroyed, nearby buildings flattened, and how hard the terrain was to fight on. He remembers his classmates, his friends, being there and doing their best to fight back. He remembers just feeling so unlucky. He remembers people screaming. He remembers jumping high in the sky. He remembers falling. And then nothing. That is it. He doesn't remember any more of the battle. No feeling, no pain, nothing. He'd forgotten nearly all of it. But he had finally remembered that he died. That he was dead. That he should still be dead. When he had woken up, it was in complete darkness, and even with the heavy fog that encompassed his brain, he knew it was wrong. It was impossibly dark with no light coming in. Where was he? How did he get there? He couldn't remember where he had fallen asleep, or even what he had done the previous day. Or what day it was. Everything was wrong, and that set off alarms in his head. But unfortunately, his mind was too much of a mess to make sense of. It did tell him that maybe he had been kidnapped, or taken by a villain. But that didn't seem right. Why couldn't he think properly? His thoughts were swirling in his head, all jumbling up and becoming a horrendous mess. It was too much, it was too heavy. Something kept screaming at him that it was wrong, that it wasn't right. Had he been drugged? Why was he naked? He couldn't see, but he could feel it. Nothing was covering him, no clothing, no blanket. Wherever he was fully ND. And that kicked a spark of panic in him. He wondered if someone was planning to experiment on him, and even though he couldn't recall what was going on, he knew that he needed to get out of there, quickly. His first problem came when he tried to move his arm, but realized that he couldn't. His arm, his whole body, felt too heavy. It felt wrong, sluggish, like he hadn't moved in days. It took all of his focus to try and curl his fingers, to gain any movement from them. He didn't know how much time passed before he found that he could at least wiggle them. His breath caught in his throat as the sudden feeling of pins and needles hit him, but he knew it was nothing compared to what he had put his poor body through before. He remembered that. But he couldn't remember what he was doing. Moving, yes, that was right. He was trying to move his body. When he finally got control of his arms again, he moved them to help him sit up, and that is when he realized how small the space he was trapped in was. His elbows knocked on walls either side of him, and his hand met a ceiling that was only inches above his head. It was cold. Metal. He had to get out. It was as if instinct took over as his feet hit against the wall at the end and he pushed. Green lightning sparked across his form, lighting the area to show how small it actually was. But then he was flying out. He landed awkwardly on his right side, slamming into a cold tiled floor. He looked up to see that it was some type of draw that he was in. He knew what it was, he recognized it, but he couldn't think of what it was called or used for. As he stood, he looked around to see that he didn't recognize the room, but he had a rough idea of what it was. And then he wondered if he was in a horror film. He was standing in a mortuary. But what was he doing there? It was like his body was on autopilot as he shut the metal tray he was lying in before. He recalled his mum always telling him to tidy up after himself. He didn't want to be rude. He looked around the room, trying to remember what he was doing, when his eyes caught something that looked vaguely familiar in a large plastic bag bundled on one of the side counters. It was his costume, his hero outfit. But why was it in a plastic bag? He was supposed to be wearing it, wasn't he? He couldn't remember where he was. Why was he there again? He looked back down at the costume and realized that he was naked. He presumed that perhaps he was there to get changed. So he decided that is what he had to do as he pulled the costume out and carefully placed the bag back on the table. The costume wasn't as green as he recalled it being, and it had new holes across it. Did he order a new design? He didn't know why he would choose the strange brownish color, or why it would have a hole in the chest and back area, or for it to smell so bad. But he knew that it was his. He concluded that they must have gotten something wrong with the design, but it was the only thing he had to wear right now, so it would have to do. He couldn't help but groan at the smell of the costume. It was horrid, and it had such a strange texture on the parts that were the brownish color. He knew it wasn't right, that something was wrong with it, but that was something he would have to deal with later. But for now, he needed to remember what he was doing. He didn't know what the room was he was standing in, but he knew that he had to find his way out of it. He knew there was a reason he was there, except his brain refused to tell him, so he decided his best bet was to leave the room and scout the area in hopes of finding someone he knew. And that is when he recognized that something was wrong with him, that he shouldn't have forgotten where he was or why he was there. Maybe he hit his head. Oh, his feet were cold. Where did he put his shoes? Perhaps he should see a nurse. The school nurse, his nurse. What was her name? Okay, why couldn't he remember her name? He could vaguely picture her in his head, but what was her name? He didn't even comprehend he had left the room until he felt a draft on him. He was outside. It was dark and he was standing on the side of a street with the wind hitting against him. It felt nice. He always liked the feeling of the wind. It reminded him of all his training jumping high in the sky like he was flying. He loved that feeling. But there was a memory there that he knew was scary, something about being in the sky, like Recovery Girl. That was her name. What was he doing? Oh right, training. He was thinking about training. He had training, right? That was what he was doing. He was heading back to the school to do some training. That sounded right, sounded normal. He automatically headed in the direction he knew the school to be without thinking about it. His body was, thankfully, becoming less sluggish, like he was gaining more control of it. But with this, he could feel a tightness building in his chest. He could feel how sore the skin was as the cold wind hit against it. It was uncomfortable. But there was nothing he could do about it. He didn't have his scarf on him. He had left that at home. Why was he at the school? It was dark. He was supposed to be at home when it was dark. No, that wasn't right. He lived in dorms now. Was he supposed to be at dorms? No, remember. He told himself he was here for training. That was right. He had to go to class so he could meet everyone for their weekly training. That is what they normally did. So that is how he found himself sitting at his desk in the 1A classroom. He vaguely recalled how he got there, but as his mind started to fight through all the fogginess, he wondered what he was doing sitting there whilst the sun had only started to rise. He didn't know what day it was, but he knew that there wasn't any training. It seemed like he blinked and suddenly there was a lot more light flooding into the room from the window on the door. Another blink and he was suddenly staring into someone's eyes. He didn't shock or surprise him. He knew this person, this man, who was looking at him with such suspicion and concern. He knew this person. It was someone he saw often, someone who he knew cared for him and helped him, someone, Sensei? He asked as it clicked who this person was. It was his teacher, Aizawa-sensei. But why was he looking at him like that? Why did his throat hurt so much? Midoriya. Right, that was his name. Midoriya. Midoriya Izuku. That was who he was. He couldn't understand how he could forget something as simple as his name when he could remember other details of his life. It was starting to get too much. He needed to remember it wasn't right to forget things. He had to focus as his teacher started speaking to him, asking if he knew where he was. Of course, he knew where he was just thinking about it. Why didn't he know this? He started to get frustrated with himself, how his brain refused to help him. He knew where he was, so say it. I'm in class? He asked. He knew that was the right answer, but he had to stop looking at Aizawa-sensei, scared that he had got the answer wrong. He didn't want to disappoint him. He stared down at his hands on the desk. When did he put on his gloves? It was only now he realized how badly his costume was destroyed. It was in pieces, barely holding together in some places. Midoriya, do you remember how you got here? He knew the answer to this question. I walked. You walked. He didn't know why he was stumbling so much. It was an easy question with an easy response, but he couldn't stop himself from mumbling. And then something caught his eye. His vision finally seemed less foggy, more focused, as he looked over to the door where he saw a dozen or more concerned faces. He knew these faces. These were his classmates, these were his friends. Why did they look so concerned? Why did they look so panicked and scared? Why were they huddled at the door staring at him from a distance? He couldn't look at them anymore as his mind raced. Everything quickly started to feel more solid, less blurry around the edges. He started to feel the heavy beating of his heart and the pain from walking barefoot in the streets. Everything started to feel real as he heard Aizawa-sensei bark something at his classmates. He felt his teacher grab his hands, holding him and grounding him to reality. This was real. And everything suddenly started to clear up and make sense again. The world was tilting back into shape. He remembered everything from when he woke up. Midoriya, you need to breathe. Calm down, slow your breathing. He didn't understand what his teacher meant until the pain in his chest hit and he could feel himself desperately gasping for air. Everything happened too quick. He looked his teacher in the eyes and he knew. Remembered. I died. I was dead. Yaoyorozu was never the closest to Midoriya, but she did have the pleasure of calling him a friend. He was, in all honesty, everything she knew a hero to be. Sure, his clumsiness and ability to injure himself so easily was something that desperately needed working on, but apart from that, she was actually a little jealous. He just seemed so good, from his trusting nature to his powerful quirk to his good grades. Everyone knew that if you ever needed help or even someone to talk to, you could always rely on Midoriya. And she was going to miss that. She did return home in the time that was given, and despite the horrible circumstance, it was a nice break to see her parents again and just appreciate being surrounded by familiarity. She knew that when they all went back, everything would be different, and there was very little she could do about that. This was all something that was out of her hands, out of her control, and it felt so wrong. So when they were all about to enter the classroom and Aizawa-sensei blocked them, she honestly didn't know how to feel looking into the room. It was a fact that they all knew Midoriya was dead. Most of them had seen it happen, her included. It was something she wouldn't forget that easily. So how could he be sitting at his desk, alive? She didn't know what was being said between her teacher and him, but she trusted Aizawa-sensei to deal with the situation and protect them if something was wrong, if it wasn't really Midoriya, or if it was. She caught the way the dead boy looked over at them. He looked so scared. Aizawa-sensei ordered them to go and retrieve Recovery Girl, Netsu and All Might. It only took a moment between them before it was decided. I'll get Recovery Girl, Ida stated just before he sped off in the direction of her office. It made sense for him to go, and she knew he would be desperate to help in any way he could. Shiro and Ishido quickly followed suit, running off to gather the other two. The rest of them were left to stay and stare awkwardly into the classroom where there was nothing for them to do. Yaoyorozu, she almost jumped at her name being called out, taken by surprise. She turned to Aizawa-sensei who called out for her. Can you please make me a blanket? She was confused for a moment until she understood what he meant, and what he needed it for. She nodded, of course. She turned away from the room to awkwardly lift up her shirt. A blanket was large, she needed her stomach to materialize it. Thankfully a blanket wasn't something hard to make, it was actually one of the first things she even learned to make with her quirk. She turned back around, a new red blanket neatly folded in her arms. She had made it a soft blanket, comfortable and warm, with a thin plastic lining to help with any shock or hypothermia. Aizawa-sensei had walked over to collect it from her. She was glad to be of some use, even if her emotions hadn't fully recovered from the situation, similar to what she imagined most of her classmates to be going through. I know that you all want to see him, but just not now while we try and work out what is going on, he explained, looking over the group of them. We don't want to distress him, and we can't be sure about anything yet. She knew that Aizawa-sensei wasn't trying to treat them like children, was trying to be honest and truthful. And she understood what he meant. I don't fully know if this is definitely Midoriya Izuku yet, so don't get your hopes up. But in case it is, you have to be prepared for the fact that something potentially awful has happened. Yes, sensei, some of the group mumbled out. I need 2 of you to get present Mike and Midnight. They should be in class 2C and 3, he explained to them. Tell them that I request their presence urgently. She looked over her shoulder to see Ojiro and Shoji nod at each other before they took off in the directions of the classrooms. Yaoyorozu knew that this day was going to be a hard one, but she could have never predicted this. And she did everything to hope and pray that this truly was Midoriya in front of them and that by some strange miracle he had returned. All thoughts stopped when she caught sight of Ishido jogging down the hallway with a distressed-looking All Might behind her. All Might was, unfortunately, very familiar with death. He had seen many die in his time, and had even seen some of those closest to him die. Nana. He understood why she sacrificed herself, to save him, or to save herself from having to watch him die. But Toshinori didn't watch Midoriya die. He wasn't there. He wasn't there, and that tore at him. He was supposed to be there, he was supposed to be there for Midoriya. But he had failed him. He knew that if he was at the actual battle, there was very little he could do in his unfortunate state, but he likes to imagine there was something he could have done. He wishes it was him. If he could take young Midoriya's place, he would do so in a heartbeat. The boy was the future, and he was the past. But now there was no future for him, and Toshinori didn't want to look on the past. He had found himself making residence in the teacher's lounge at UA. He hadn't gone back to teaching yet, that thankfully wasn't starting again for some time, but he felt so useless just sitting at home by himself. Being at UA didn't really help either. Every time he saw a group of students pass, he couldn't help but imagine Midoriya there, learning, growing, living. It was where he was meant to be. Even if Toshinori hadn't chosen Midoriya as his successor and passed the power of one for all to him, he could still imagine that the boy would have some way found his way into the school. He was meant to be a hero. He was All Might Sensei. Someone burst through the doors, slamming them heavily, but they didn't seem to care as they called out for him. It was one of the girls from Class 1A, Midoriya's class. Ishido was her name, he remembered. She didn't give him a chance to respond, not even giving herself a moment to catch her breath properly. You have to come to class quick, it's Midoriya. Midoriya? No, that wasn't right. He must have heard her wrong. Young. No, please, you'll understand. You have to come, he is here, he's alive, she pleaded. Now he knew that he was definitely hearing things wrong. But the determined look on her face said differently. He was alive? He was out of his seat before he knew it, rushing to the door. Ishido's exhaustion from having run all the way to find him didn't deter her as she started to jog ahead, leading him back to the classroom. Toshinori was confused and didn't understand what she truly meant. There was no possible way his charge could still be alive. He saw the body, saw the hole, he was dead. He couldn't help but wonder if someone was playing a cruel trick. And then he saw him. Midoriya. He was sat at his desk, a heavy blanket draped over his tattered and torn form, but very much alive. Whole and alive. He couldn't help but freeze in shock after entering the room, staring at the dead boy who hadn't even noticed him yet. If it wasn't for Eraserhead sitting calmly in front of the boy, reassuring him, he would have thought it a horrible prank. But then Eraserhead looked over at him and gave him a gentle nod, assuring him that this was real. And then the boy's eyes lit up as follow Eraserhead's line of sight. He locked eyes with the boy. Gods, he looked so drained, so... All Might? The boy asked in his usual timid voice. It was harsher and sounded painful, but it was his, and that was all the confirmation that he needed. Toshinori walked towards the boy, unable to stop the tears that started to fall down his face. He placed his large hand on the boy's shoulder. It was warm, it was alive. My boy. Aizawa wished that All Might hadn't started crying upon seeing Midoriya, as it made the boy seem uncomfortable, but he understood that the situation was emotionally distressing and wasn't an easy one to handle. He quickly filled him in on the previous events of walking into the class to find him. He told him that the kid seemed confused and disorientated, that he realized he had died but didn't seem to know much else. All Might thanked him for getting someone to retrieve him. Thankfully, it was only a couple more moments before Ida returned with Recovery Girl in tow. Despite how composed she usually was, even she stumbled her step upon seeing the boy, who looked like he wanted to say something but didn't know how to. You know, Recovery Girl said as she recomposed herself quickly, I have seen a lot of things in my time, but I would have never predicted this one. Aizawa had to agree with her. Young man, do you realize the fright you have given everyone? She joked as she wandered over to him, nudging his leg with her signature cane. He didn't seem to respond to her interaction, only nodding slightly like he thought it was the right thing to do. She hummed to herself, noted that she wasn't likely to get a proper response from the boy. Present Mike nearly crashed through the gathering of students and stumbled into the room. Aizawa eyed him carefully, seeing that he was about to do his usual scream of greeting, and went to stop him, but thankfully one look at the situation and he shut his mouth. Aizawa knew that he must have run to the room, considering the class he was teaching was nearly on the other side of the campus. He was thankful, knowing that Hizashi responded so quickly to his urgent request. He knew that Hizashi and Namuri would be initially confused and wondering what the hell would have happened for him to call them out of their classes. But he needed them to look over his own class whilst he dealt with Midoriya. He knew it was unfair on their students, but he hoped they would forgive missing a couple of classes considering the situation. His class was in shock, and they wanted answers, and he needed to keep them away so as not to distress the situation. But they needed help and comfort of their own to deal with everything until he could give them answers. Isn't that? Hizashi asked, pointing over to Midoriya. Everyone would recognize him, especially after he had been plastered over the news, but Hizashi was smart and he could quickly work out the situation. Aizawa looked over to see that Midoriya's attention was taken by All Might and that he was okay, before stepping away to talk to Hizashi. Mike, I'm sorry, but can you look after my students whilst I deal with this? He asked, gesturing over his shoulder. I have called Namuri as well. After seeing this, I think the students are going to need all the support they can get. Hizashi's face fell into pure sympathy. Of course, no problem, he nodded. What should I tell the kiddies? Honestly, Aizawa had no idea. With no answers, he didn't know how to even describe the situation. Tell them to just not freak out, keep calm. Tell them we will let them know more when we have some answers, but until then they will only speculate. They are tough kids, they've been through a lot, but it is not every day you see your dead classmate come back to life. Don't worry, I got it. Hizashi gave him a big thumbs up, showing his support. How are you? Aizawa hadn't expected him to ask that. This wasn't about him. He didn't have time to worry about how he was feeling. He could do that later. He just nodded in response as he turned back to Midoriya, knowing that his students were in good hands as Hizashi turned to his class just as Namuri arrived. Don't worry, my boy, everything will come to you. You have been through something tragic, All Might said to the boy. He had turned one of the chairs around to sit next to the boy in comfort. He was no longer crying, and he was sure it was because Recovery Girl had grilled into him. Midoriya nodded along to what All Might was saying, but it didn't look as if he fully agreed with what he was saying, or he just didn't really know what the man was saying to him. His class was now gone, shuffled away back to their dorm most likely. He was thankful and partly surprised that there wasn't a fight from them to stay. It was no surprise that Nedzu suddenly appeared out of nowhere, as he usually did. My, this surely is a strange situation. The rat dog mouse's usual smile was plastered on his face, not swayed by the strange events. Sorry I took so long to arrive. I sent the young student who called for me back to his friends, and I made a quick call. I have contacted the morgue, and they have confirmed that Midoriya Izuku's body is missing, along with the outfit they removed from him at his time of death. Trust the principal to be one step ahead of them. Unfortunately, we cannot fully believe that this is that Midoriya without checking, but for now we shall treat him as he is. Nedza did have a good point. Although Aizawa was sure that this was the real, and now alive, Midoriya, they did have to make sure it wasn't a strange ploy. He knew it wasn't the work of a quirk from his own, but seeing the boy alive convinced him to keep a very open mind. My recommendation is contacting the hospital for an emergency visit. I think we should get Midoriya fully checked over, and we can have them cross-reference all of his records. What do you think this is? Aizawa asked. I don't know. How strange. Nedza laughed. Perhaps it is a quirk? A second quirk? He asked. He had to remember, open mind. Stranger things have happened, Nedzu suggested. All Might's hand on his shoulder was a screaming comfort, something that was keeping him stable. Despite now remembering the events that lead him to the classroom, and summarizing that he had woken up from being dead, it didn't make anything any easier. He couldn't remember how he died exactly, but he was a smart kid, and the giant hole in his costume was a big clue. He couldn't work out if the tightness in his chest had to do with what caused his death, or if it was due to his lungs getting a good workout from his panic and stress. People were talking to him, but he couldn't focus on it. It was overwhelming. He just needed to curl up and think. He wanted time to stop and think everything through, to try and understand, but that wasn't going to happen with the number of concerned people around him that also wanted answers. Recovery Girl was talking to him, or maybe it was All Might, but he just dumbly nodded along to whatever they were saying. He hoped they could forgive him for his vacant and rude attitude. The hand from his shoulder disappeared, and he turned to All Might quickly, almost too quickly, to see what was happening. The man looked down at him with a sad smile, but he knew it was okay. All Might was still there, he was still there, he was still alive. It was Aizawa-sensei who took his place in the chair next to him. Midoriya. His name sounded so sharp, so familiar, he knew he had to use all of his energy to just pay attention for a moment to whatever it was his teacher had to say to him. We have rung your mother and explained as much as we can to her. She is going to meet us at the hospital. He didn't want to go back to a hospital. That was where there were morgues, that was where he woke. He didn't want to go back. Aizawa-sensei sighed, placing his hand on Midoriya's neck, partly hoping that he would be able to feel the thudding of a pulse under his hand. But he did so mainly out of comfort. He could see that the boy was getting too worked up and overwhelmed. After everything that has happened, we need to get you checked out, to make sure that you are okay, he explained slowly and carefully so he understood. When I said you were a problem child, I never imagined you would go this far to prove me right. Midoriya would have laughed at that if he could make himself. I'm sorry, he muttered, so quietly that only Aizawa could hear him. There is nothing to be sorry about, Midoriya. Let's be glad that you are still here to cause me more problems in the future. Something about that statement broke Midoriya as he couldn't stop his emotions raging through him. He covered his mouth as he suffocated into tears. He knew they were loud and ugly and he was screaming, but he couldn't help it. Everything was pouring out. The tears were choking him, blinding him. He felt himself feeling too much at once. But more than anything, he felt alive. And then, suddenly, he did remember. He remembered flying high in the air, having jumped using 20% of his strength to dodge and attack and keep the attack off his friends around him on the ground. He remembered how amazing it felt to feel so weightless as he twisted and positioned himself to attack in retaliation. He had his finger ready to blast as he faced the right direction, quickly making sure no one else would be in the way of the attack as he let it go. The surge of air pushed him backwards, further up in the sky again. He only used 10% and was relieved to know that his finger was okay and could take another couple of attacks. He aimed again, ready to hit once the dust cleared from his last attack, but Todoroki got there first and blocked in the villain with an ice shield. He lowered his hand, preparing to land correctly as the lightning sparked across his body. But then he caught sight of some ribbon weapon, that reminded him a lot like his teachers, heading straight towards him. He was able to quickly twist himself out of the way, grabbing the ribbon to use as an anchor to land directly at the villain using it. But he was too focused, too slow. Too stupid. The other attack came so fast, a harsh bolt of pure power aimed straight for his chest. He tried to dodge, but moving around in the air wasn't as easy when you were busy focusing on landing correctly. He remembers it hitting him, burning and scorching its way through his body, through his chest to the other side. He remembers the blood hitting his chin, his face, and being blinded by it. But he doesn't remember the pain. He doesn't know if he forgot, or if it actually hurt him. His memory faded from there. He vaguely remembers falling faster and lots of screaming, but that was it. It happened in seconds and he was dead. When Midoriya thinks about it, he's almost embarrassed about how stupid a death it was. How easily avoidable it was. It makes him realize how much further he still has to go to become a better hero. But he knows how lucky he is to have that chance. 'Cause, somehow, he was now alive again. Midoriya Izuku used to believe that the worst moment of her life was when her son first found himself in hospital with multiple intensive injuries. But then he ended up in the hospital, again and again and again and again. Despite knowing her son's dream, she wished he never discovered his quirk and ended up at that school. All she kept seeing was how much his quirk kept destroying him over and over again. But she knew Izuku would never have it. He cared too much about his dream, about helping other people, to let her stop him. And she wanted to be so proud of him and his selflessness, but the selfish part of her just wanted to protect him from all of that. When the phone rang, a part of her somehow already knew what it was going to be about. She knew it wasn't going to be a good call, and she thought it strange how she wished it was just them informing her that Izuku had gotten injured again. What a strange thing to wish for, but in hindsight she still wishes that was all it was. Dread sat in her stomach when she answered the phone, and only silence had met her at first. "Mrs. Midoriya," she finally heard someone say as she contemplated hanging up. They sounded remorseful. She didn't want to hear it. She wanted to believe that ignorance truly was bliss. But she knew what they were going to say before they did. "I am so sorry, so sorry, but your son Midoriya, I'm afraid there was another villain attack. I'm sorry, he got injured badly, he didn't make it." The phone hit the ground as she did. She was suddenly drowning in tears and wailing in her grief. The world had stopped for her. Everything was frozen, gone, destroyed. Nothing was real anymore. She always feared that this day would come, but she never actually prepared herself for it. The days after that started to blur. She remembers just numbly sitting on the sofa for the longest time, unable to sleep, unwilling to sleep. Everything about her was broken. Her heart was bleeding out of her body and her lungs were constricting her ability to breathe. It was painful, but she didn't care. She wanted to feel the pain. The first couple of phone calls she actually could bring herself to answer were all about arrangements, about what needed to happen and what she now needed to do. She didn't want to hear it, but she knew that she had little choice. She had to for her son. Her dead son. She had to stop answering the house phone eventually. Her son's death was over the news, talking about the tragic ending of a student, and everyone was trying to get in contact with her for a statement or a quote. She unplugged it after the second day. How inconsiderate, how rude. She left her mobile phone on and set it so only people registered as a contact could ring. The phone call to inform her about Izuku's death was horrible, but actually seeing her poor baby's body was something else. He looked no different to how he usually did sleeping, with a blanket pulled up to his shoulders and a peaceful calm look on his face. The moment she broke, however, was when she brushed back his hair with her hand and could see some smears of blood they hadn't washed off properly. She hadn't known how he had actually died at that point, not even considering it, and seeing that just made her realize how it wasn't a peaceful death. He was fighting villains. She should have known it was going to be a horribly painful death. She eventually asked, when All Might had come to visit her, and he explained. He didn't want to give all the details. He was trying to be brief, but she wouldn't allow that. She wanted to know exactly what had happened to her son. So he told her. And she was right in knowing that it was a gruesome death, but that he had died almost instantly. That he wouldn't have really felt anything. But that didn't give her the peace she thought the man hoped it would. She initially didn't want to see All Might. She wanted to blame him for it all, for leading her son into the life that led to his despair and death. She wanted it to be his fault. But this man was her son's hero, his idol. He was everything that her son wanted to be, and she knew that Izuku wouldn't forgive her for blaming it all on him. But when he entered her apartment, saw her and broke down himself, she knew that he did blame himself for it all. He wouldn't stop saying how sorry he was, how it was his fault. She didn't comfort him, she couldn't, but she understood. He didn't stay for long, it was only to go over details of what had to happen next. Everything was still too fresh and raw to talk and reminisce about her son. She was actually thankful when, a couple of days later, Mitsuki Bakugo appeared at her door. She hadn't had many visits, ignoring most people who got in contact, but Mitsuki was someone she hadn't seen in a long time and was someone who could relate considering what her own son had been through. Inko wasn't very surprised when she saw her son's childhood friends storm off when she invited them in. He and Izuku were very close, having known each other for most of their lives, and that transformed into becoming trainee heroes together. It was only through Mitsuki she learnt that he had been there to see her son die. It wasn't some time after that when she got a strange phone call early one morning. She was already up, having not slept much when she saw it was Izuku's homeroom teacher calling. "Hello?" she asked, answering the call. "Midoriya-san, I am really sorry, but can you meet us at the general hospital?" Midoriya woke up in an uncomfortable position, but he was nice and warm and didn't want to have to move. Annoyingly, he had little choice but to wake up by someone constantly nudging him. He slowly opened his eyes, taking a couple of tries considering how heavy his eyelids were. Midoriya. Someone called out his name. Where was he again? Oh right, he was in All Might's car. He remembered this time, he knew where he was. Thankfully all of his forgetfulness was starting to fade off, his brain actually working as normal now. "Midoriya, we have to go inside now." He turned to see that the door of the car was open and it was Aizawa-sensei who was trying to wake him. They were at hospital, yes, that is what they were doing. All Might and Aizawa-sensei had swiftly brought him to the car to zoom off from the school so he could be checked, but he must have fallen asleep at some point. "We just need to check some stuff over, then you can sleep. You need to check that I am me." He hadn't heard what they talked about earlier, but he knew that is what they would do. It was reasonable that they make sure he wasn't some kind of copy or someone pretending to be him. But he was sure that he was himself. Suddenly coming back from the dead aside, he likes to hope he would know if he really was himself. And anyway, waking up inside a morgue was pretty good evidence, but the others couldn't fully take his word for it. For all they knew, someone stole his body and replaced him with this person in front of them now. Well, he knew that wasn't right. But even he wanted answers as to what happened, how he was alive. He wasn't 100% sure that it wasn't someone else's quirk that did it, but he had a very good feeling that wasn't the case. "Midoriya, where are we?" Aizawa-sensei asked him after All Might helped him take his place on top of a hospital bed, leaving his legs swinging over the side. They had called ahead and the hospital had gotten everything ready for them. "At the hospital," he responded, his voice still not fully healed. It felt dry, maybe he needed a drink. Aizawa-sensei nodded. "Good. Is it getting easier?" he asked. Midoriya knew he was talking about the disorientation, and he was touched on how his teacher recognized it and was trying to help. He nodded in response and saw how much that made All Might a little brighter. All Might was just glad that the boy was perking up and slowly coming back to himself. Whatever the boy had gone through, it had to have been traumatic. They all turned to the door opening, and for a moment Midoriya thought it was going to be one of the doctors, but instead he was met with his mum's stunned face. She was completely frozen, to the point it even seemed like she had stopped breathing. Midoriya didn't know why seeing his mum, who looked so drained and tired like himself, would upset him so much. It wasn't an angry sad, but an overwhelming wave of depression, because he knew his mum thought he was dead, for a week, and he had promised to never worry her like that again. But he did. Izuku. His mum was suddenly crying, rushing to him within seconds and crushing her arms around him. "Izuku, my boy." She mumbled into his chest as he wrapped his arms around her as well and failed to gulp back his own tears. "I'm so sorry, Mum," he muttered, tightening his own hold. I'm so sorry, Aizawa-sensei, and All Might let them be for a while, knowing that they both needed this moment. It had been a debate whether to contact Midoriya's mother or not until they knew for sure if it truly him, but it was All Might who pointed out that she would not be thankful to be left in the dark about anything that involved her son. How are you? How is this real? His mum asked as she took a step back from their embrace, hands still clamped tightly around his arms. He caught the way she looked at the large hole in his costume and scanned every inch of his face like it was holding the answer. That is what we are here for, to find out how and make sure everything is okay, All Might explained from his new seat next to the bed. Midoriya knew they left out the part about checking to make sure he was who he was, probably not to distress his mum further. You told me you found him in your classroom, she said, looking at Aizawa-sensei, who found his spot leaning against the back wall of the room. Yes, he confirmed. We walked in this morning to find him, but we can be assured that he wasn't there any longer than a couple of hours, but we don't know how he got there, Aizawa-sensei explained, looking at Midoriya rather than his mum. They wanted an explanation. Izuku, baby, how did you get there? What happened to you? His mum asked softly, pushing a hand through his hair like she used to do when he was younger. He took a couple of big gulps, stopping his crying and trying to make his throat more comfortable. I woke up not knowing where I was. But I vaguely recall knowing that it was a morgue when I could work it out. I remember seeing my costume and thinking that it was what I was supposed to be wearing, so I put it on. He looked down at his hands again, not wanting to see anyone's face. He knew what he was saying wasn't going to make anyone comfortable. I didn't really know what was going on at the time. I hadn't understood what had happened. It was like my brain wasn't awake and refused to remember what I was doing as I did it. I remember thinking that I had training, or that we had some sort of exercise to do. I think it was something to do with seeing the costume. So my brain told me I had to get to the school. It was only after seeing Aizawa-sensei I worked out what was going on. None of them could imagine what Midoriya went through from waking up in a morgue to walking through the city alone to end up at the school. Especially considering how confused and lost he was at the time. They supposed they were very lucky that the boy did find his way to the school and wasn't still wandering the city, forgetting everything, even who he was. But thankfully they didn't need to think about that. He was fine, he was there with them now. It didn't take much longer before a nurse came into the room to get everything they needed off of Midoriya to help confirm his identity. And then it wasn't much longer after that until a doctor walked in. Well, Midoriya thought it wasn't much longer, but it just turned out that he had fallen back asleep before. Fortunately, someone had come in at some point and gave him a plain t-shirt and matching trousers that he could get changed into it, so he didn't have to keep wearing the destroyed and dirty costume. Well, the doctor started, looking down at all the papers he had collected before him. All the small tests we did have matched our records, including the fingerprints and blood type. There are dozens of different tests we can do, but I can think of one that can work a lot better. You have a physical quirk, is this correct? Yeah, that's right, Midoriya confirmed. He could feel his mum's grip on him tighten slightly. She was always a little strange whenever his quirk was mentioned, and that is because she believed it to be his biological quirk, not knowing anything about how he actually acquired the power. Could you demonstrate it? The doctor asked. It wasn't like there was anything that he could punch or kick in the room without causing an intensive amount of damage, but he hoped that activating it would be enough. He gently removed his mum's hand from him, giving her a small smile as he did so to help reassure her that it would be okay. He didn't want to risk injuring her. From his place on the bed, he clenched his fists and turned that little switch on in his brain to activate his quirk. Green lighting started to spark across his skin almost immediately, the red marks that came from cowling also lighting up. He looked over to All Might to see him smiling and nodding, confirming that it was okay. Good, thank you. Eraserhead, would you mind trying your quirk against him? The doctor had asked. Aizawa-sensei nodded, taking a step forward towards the bed. He knew he had already done this, with nothing happening, but it didn't hurt to try whilst Midoriya's quirk was active. He felt the burn of his eyes as he activated his quirk, looking at Midoriya, whose own quirk shut off. Thank you. Aizawa-sensei cancelled his quirk at the doctor's voice, knowing that was all he needed. In my professional opinion, I am sure this is Midoriya Izuku. Midoriya could almost imagine a burst of confetti at the confirmation, but alas there was nothing but a sigh of relief from All Might. But now, oh that didn't sound good, we need to work out what happened with you young man. Honestly, Midoriya didn't mind that, as he was desperate to know too. He did have a rough idea himself, he wasn't an idiot, but it didn't hurt to see what the professionals had to say. There are initially two explanations for your sudden resurrection. 1. Someone healed your major injuries and brought you back to life via a quirk of their own. Or, you somehow have a secondary quirk yourself that did the same. Through some of the tests we did, it seems for certain that the latter is the case. And to fully confirm this, I am here. The doctor explained, dramatically pointing at himself. My quirk allows me to read the quirks of other people, hence why I was the one called in for this. That made a lot of sense, Midoriya realized. But that meant that his theory was true. My quirk is telling me that you do indeed have two quirks, my boy, and one of them is reading as Immortality. It was his biological quirk, he was sure of it. It could have been a derivative of the one for all quirk, but that would have not registered as a separate quirk. He had a biological quirk. It was just an unfortunate circumstance that was needed for the quirk to show itself. He had an Immortality quirk. How is it possible he has two quirks? His mum had asked, grabbing him once more now that it was safe to do so. Midoriya didn't mind, he liked the contact. He could imagine his mum's fear that after the appearance of his first quirk, he was suddenly going to branch off until he developed more and more. That is what I would say is the strangest thing about this. It is not really known to have more than one quirk. But Todoroki has two quirks. He argued. All for one had more than one quirk as well, but that was something entirely different, and something he was not going to bring up. It was Aizawa-sensei who responded, understanding what Midoriya was getting at. Yes, but they are both genetic. Exactly. The doctor said. It is already strange that your super strength quirk doesn't relate to either of your parents, but that does often happen. Genetics can be a messy game. However, the fact that you now have two quirks that are so separate from each other is what is confusing. It wasn't confusing, it made perfect sense to Midoriya. His super strength quirk wasn't a biological one, it wasn't his own. But now he did have one. He couldn't help but wonder about that old doctor who had misdiagnosed him as quirkless when he was younger, when in fact he wasn't. But he did agree that his new-founded quirk had nothing to do with either of his parents' quirks. Immortality didn't quite come from breathing fire or attracting objects. However strange, I think we can be thankful for its existence. All Might spoke up. Midoriya knew he would be having the same train of thought, knowing that he was the only one in the room that also knew his secret with his quirk. He didn't miss the way Aizawa-sensei's eyes narrowed ever so slightly at him, as if he had realized there was something that wasn't being told. We sure can. But if Izuku now has this new quirk, Immortality, that means he can't die, right? His mum asked. The doctor sighed, putting away the papers that held no more answers for him. Unfortunately, we don't know everything about this new quirk, and testing it will be not favorable. That was something they could all agree with. Though Midoriya was not awake for the week he was dead, the waking up part wasn't exactly enjoyable. Do you know why he was so disorientated when he woke up? Aizawa-sensei asked. The doctor shrugged his shoulders. There are many potential reasons. As this was the first time this quirk was used, that we know of, it could have been an intense experience, something that would get better with more use of it. Or it could just be a side effect of the quirk itself. The body heals itself to the point of life, but the mind hasn't caught up yet. All Might had stood from his chair, clapping a hand against Midoriya's shoulder. Thankfully, as we now know about this quirk, if something like this ever happens again, we can be prepared. Nothing like this will ever happen again. His mum had torn him from All Might's hand, pushing him into her hold. Mum, he tried to argue, pushing from her embrace. No, Izuku. You died. She screamed, shaking his shoulders like she was trying to shake sense into him. There is no downplaying that. If it wasn't for this miraculous quirk, you would still be dead like anyone else in your position. Your mother is right. He was shocked to hear Aizawa-sensei agree with her statement. This isn't a chance for you to be more reckless than before. This isn't just a traumatic experience for you, it's also for all those who care for you. He knew that, he did, and he wasn't planning on being any more reckless. It wasn't as if he tried to be as rash as he was. I'm afraid I must agree as well, the doctor spoke up. Your records are just riddled with broken bones and similar injuries in a short amount of time. It doesn't take a genius to work out what type of kid you are. But this quirk only saves you from death, not from non-life-threatening injuries. Izuku looked down at his hands. The scars were still the same. They hadn't disappeared despite his body healing the hole in his chest, but even that wasn't fully healed, and now he sported a lovely new large scar across his chest and back. Your body seems to heal itself to the point of making sure you are alive again, but no further than that. That is why you still have your scars, because your body decided it didn't need to heal them for you to live. So in conclusion, you can't die. Your body will heal any life-threatening injuries, but it will not heal any non-life-threatening injuries. So you still have to be very careful. You can still easily lose your arms and such if you overuse them. They won't magically grow back. Izuku, please, you can't. Please, you can't keep doing this. His mum was crying again. He had made her cry again. He coughed as his mum hugged him once more. I'm sorry, Mum, I broke my promise, he said regretfully. Another moment passed before the doctor asked, You must be really hungry and thirsty. Midoriya hadn't even thought about that. He supposed his throat was still really dry, and that could easily be from lack of hydration as well as lack of use. I actually don't feel hungry or thirsty. It's strange. That could be because your body stopped you needing it for a while, or perhaps you don't need it at all. But as you are now alive, you should give everything your body needs to stay alive, the doctor joked. I just feel tired. The doctor told him that was expected with everything that had happened, and how much the quirk had taken out on his body. It was decided, without him might he add, that he would stay in the hospital overnight whilst attached to N4 to replenish his body, and to make sure everything was still working okay. Midoriya didn't actually mind it, as long as he got to sleep quicker. He felt as if he could sleep for another week, but that was a joke he was going to keep to himself. His mum had now become on edge with all the information and everything that had happened. He knew she wouldn't appreciate him joking. He wasn't looking forward to the future debates that he knew were going to happen about letting him back to school. But he would worry about that the next day. For now, he wanted to rest and let everything that had happened fade away for a while. It had been a terrifying experience, but now he just felt so lucky and happy to be alive. Midoriya found himself back home after a very fussy night in the hospital. His mum had stayed with him the whole night he was there, refusing to leave his side, and he believed that was because she was scared he was going to somehow disappear on her again. The fretting didn't stop when he was released to go back home. He still needed a lot of rest, so that is what he mainly did. But sometimes, when he was awake, he would find his mum just standing there staring at him. However scary it was, he found himself being patient, as he understood how horrific the whole ordeal must have been for her. He couldn't imagine what he would be like if it was the other way around. At least she had stopped crying now. But she looked at him with such sadness, like she understood something he didn't. He almost thought she would be happy, knowing that he couldn't die. He hoped that would help with some of her fears for his safety. But it almost seemed to do the opposite. When they had returned back, he had seen the funeral arrangements across the coffee table that his mum had been trying to sort through when she had got the call to the hospital. Seeing a picture of yourself on a memorial pamphlet was a surreal experience. It didn't feel real, almost like it had been made for a poor joke, but it helped him realize what exactly his mum had gone through without him. It was like seeing an alternate universe where you were dead. Aizawa-sensei and All Might had stopped by to check on him and his mum the day he got released from the hospital. They had appeared mainly to make sure that everything was okay, and to ask if they needed anything. Aizawa-sensei told him that they were ready to welcome him back whenever he was ready to return, that his classmates were missing him. And that is what started the debate he was waiting for with his mum. It was like that moment when All Might had come to their apartment to discuss Midoriya moving into the dorms. He knew of his mum's feelings, but he was almost still shocked to hear them. He remembers what she said when she first mentioned that she wanted him to leave UA. But All Might had made a promise with his mum that he would give his life to protect Midoriya if she was willing to allow it. Midoriya felt it was all different now. He felt as if those promises didn't matter anymore. He didn't need protecting as he couldn't die. "I know what you are going to say, Izuku," his mum said after she said goodbye to his teachers. She turned to him from her place near the door with such a worrying look on her face. He had told her before that it didn't matter if she pulled him out of UA, he was still going to be a hero no matter what. And he still held to that, but he wanted to convince her that UA wasn't the enemy. I want to be supportive, you know that," his mum cut him off. "But please consider that you shouldn't go back, please." Midoriya could feel his heart jam into his throat. He didn't want to have this conversation again, he didn't want to make her worried about him. He promised her that he wouldn't. But he was never that lucky. "I want to go back, this hasn't changed anything for me." "That's because to you it's like nothing has happened. You weren't here that week, you were dead." His mum cried. "You were dead, Izuku. It wasn't like you were injured in the hospital wondering if your hand would be okay, you were dead." "I'm so sorry, Mum. I don't want to make you worried about me, I don't mean to. But despite even this, I am going to become a hero." His mum gave him a small smile. It reminds him of that time when he was younger when they first discovered he was potentially quirkless. "I know. It is what you have wanted all your life, and I have resigned myself to the fact that not even I would be able to stop you, or should be able to stop you." He returned the smile just as he saw hers drop. "But you have to stop this, Izuku." He reasoned with her that now she should have less reason to worry. He was going to be fine, he couldn't die. But she didn't see it like that. "Now this just gives you more reason to get yourself injured. You may not be able to die anymore, but you can still suffer." He didn't know what to say. He knew there wasn't anything that would comfort his mum. He couldn't promise her that he wouldn't get injured or get killed again because he was sure that he wouldn't be able to hold that promise. He knew she had every right to worry, but he supposed it was easier to accept the life of pain ahead of you when it was yourself. He knew he would be the same if he were in her shoes. They somehow found themselves in an intense hug, his mum crying against his shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Mum. Why couldn't you get a force field quirk where you would be less likely to get injured?" she joked. "Knowing me, I presume I would still find some way." They had finally come to an agreement after that. He was going to spend the rest of the week at home, as it was a Wednesday, and he would return back to school the following Monday. He gave time to comfort his mum and to make sure that he was 100% okay before returning. He had almost forgotten about what All Might left him. Before they had left, All Might had passed him a piece of paper he was told to keep safe. It was a copy of his newest quirk registration form. Quirk, Immortality. Use, can heal life-threatening injuries and resurrect self. Known side effects, as of DDMMYY, can take time to revive depending on the cause of death. When woken, the person becomes very confused and disorientated, lacking the ability to retain short-term memory. It was something of wonder. If only he could go back to his younger self and tell him not to worry, because not only were they going to get a quirk from their idol, but he was also going to discover that he had a quirk of his own. From quirkless to 2 quirks. It was so surreal. He was looking forward to returning back to UA and seeing his friends again. He didn't have his phone, it was in the backpack he had taken on the field trip and he didn't know where that had ended up. He needed to see if anyone knew, or he would have to buy himself a new phone. Oh, his latest hero analysis notebook was in that bag. But anyway, he wondered what his friends were thinking. He didn't want to concern them as well, but he knew that he definitely scared them. They all thought he had died. Midoriya realized how somewhat easier he had it. Sure, the whole not really remembering anything was scary, but he was dead for a week and didn't have to deal with anything. Whilst everyone else was left grieving for him. He hoped that they were all okay. No one was okay. Shinso watched as everyone from Class 1A develop into various stages of shock, anger, and denial. It was overall very messy. He would like to say that there was something more traumatic about seeing someone who you thought was very much dead come back to life than the actual death itself. Death was something that happened, and although tragic, it was easier to accept. Mourning was something that most people went through at some point in their life. Seeing someone come back from the dead was something no one could prepare you for. Sure, if it was someone you knew to have a revival quirk, you would become used to it. But for all they knew, Midoriya only had 1 quirk. and he was pretty sure that he hadn't super punched his way back to life. Although if anyone could do that, it would be him. Midoriya had only been his friend for a couple of months. He couldn't imagine what his family had to go through, having dealt with him all his life. But it turned out that, not only did Midoriya enjoy a good fight in life, he enjoyed it in death as well. The rest of the class, including himself, had been shuffled back to the dorms after witnessing that scene in the morning. Everyone was shouting questions. Someone was explaining how it must have been a clone or a twin brother. Kaminari kept mumbling about how it wasn't real. Uraraka had started crying again. Azui and Hagakure were comforting her as they were trying to process everything they had seen. Shinso also didn't miss the way that Bakugo looked, a mix of wanting to punch something and wanting to storm back to the class to get the answers himself. Shinso did feel sorry for present Mike and Midnight, who was left dealing with them. It would have been easier if any of them knew what was going on, but no one did. Can I be the first to say, what the F dash? Language. Ida yelled like he always did when someone in the class swore. He did take his role as class president very seriously. Despite the current situation, we must still behave accordingly. F off glasses, Bakugo said. At least he wasn't shouting as well. Shinso didn't know if he could handle that on top of everything else at the time. Unfortunately, it seems like he was going to get a headache either way thanks to present Mike. Now little listeners. He shouted over the chatter of multiple conversations. We understand this isn't a normal circumstance, Midnight said, and we also understand that it is a disturbing and distressing thing you have all witnessed. She was speaking like she was trying to avoid mentioning the basic fact of what had happened. Aizawa-sensei has asked us to look over you for now. Present Mick's voice was still louder than normal speaking level. That headache was definitely setting up camp now. We ask that you don't leave these dorms, but we will be here if you need to talk about anything or need anything. No one left the common room they had all set up camp in. Not even Shinso, despite his headache, wanted to leave at the risk of missing something important. There were PRDS where no one said anything, and then moments when everyone was saying everything. Some of them, like Uraraka and Bakugo, were desperate to see Midoriya, to see if it was definitely him or not with their own eyes. But even if they were allowed to leave, it's not like they knew where he would be. Shinso guessed a hospital of some sorts. Aizawa-sensei had reappeared at the end of the day, and he looked tired, like more tired than he usually did. He ignored most of the class's outburst of questions as he went to go and speak to present Mike and Midnight, probably to catch them up and relieve them of their duty as babysitters. Aizawa-sensei had confirmed to everyone that Midoriya was definitely alive, that he had been brought back to life by a mysterious secondary quirk he had somehow developed. He told them that he was okay now. Shinso had done some private training under their teacher and liked to think that he came to know him quite well. He easily picked up on his choice of wording. Midoriya was okay now, and that just meant that he hadn't been before when they saw him. He had told them that, no, he wasn't sure when he would be returning or when they could see him. He pre-warned all of them to not dare try and invade his mother's apartment, to give them time to themselves until he was ready. It was a complicated situation. Aizawa-sensei wasn't telling them everything, but Shinso could tell that the man hoped the information he gave would comfort them for a while. Shinso would say that it did. Despite the fact that they were still not allowed to see him, they knew for sure that Midoriya was alive. But even with that knowledge, he couldn't erase the dead body that he had seen, splattered and lifeless on the pavement that day. Even Midoriya now being alive wasn't going to stop those nightmares. Well, Ashido was the first to speak. I'm glad I haven't bought a dress for the funeral yet. Mina, you can't say stuff like that. Uraraka berated the girl. Ashido argued that it was a joke, it didn't matter anymore considering he was alive and there wasn't any funeral to go to. Shinso didn't find the joke funny, but he understood that some of his classmates dealt with uncomfortable situations through morbid humor. But God, he was glad that Midoriya was alive so as not to leave him with all these people. Are you gonna be alright, kid? Aizawa-sensei asked him. Midoriya nodded enthusiastically, yes. Today was finally the day he was allowed back to the school. They had actually agreed that it would be better to return the Sunday evening, so to give him a small amount of time to adjust again before diving into class as usual. Although he didn't mind the time spent at home, and he knew his mum needed it, He was more than happy to get things back to usual. He was excited just to learn, see his friends, continue his training. He was craving normality. If you need anything, let us know, Aizawa-sensei said. He had come to pick Midoriya up from his home and bring him back to the dorms. He did it mainly to help explain what he had missed and such whilst he was gone. He explained that his classmates had started going back to lessons now, but they were all desperate to see him again. Aizawa-sensei had told them to give each other space, and do not crowd him when he first arrived. He had to explain to Midoriya that some of them were still touchy about everything that happened, and that things might be different for a time, whilst everyone got used to what had happened. Thank you for everything, sensei, Midoriya said as sincerely as he could, and he hoped that Aizawa-sensei knew how much he meant it. Aizawa-sensei smiled down at him. Go on, better get this over with, he said, pointing to the doors of the dorms that they were stood outside of. Midoriya nodded, adjusting his back straps before opening the door. When he walked into what led to the common area, no one had noticed him. A majority of the class were there, assumingly waiting for his arrival, but they were all distracted by what they were doing. Midoriya stood there awkwardly for a moment before deciding to make his presence known. Hey guys. Wow, that turned a lot of heads. There was a sudden burst of cries as people rushed him, and he didn't expect Kaminari to actually scream in his face. He was suddenly engulfed in multiple pairs of arms, being crushed by the pressure of his friends, but he didn't mind. It was actually really sweet. Wait. He heard Uraraka cry over everyone else. They all wiggled their way off of him in time for him to see Uraraka and Azui holding a giant sign that said, "We're glad you're not dead." Not only the effort that must have gone into making it, but the fact they had used the All Might colors was really touching. Midoriya. Ida stepped in front of him, looking down with his usual serious expression. I am very glad that you are all right. Ida's glasses were shaded so he couldn't see his eyes, but by the ridged way he was standing and looking down at the floor in a slight bow, Midoriya could tell he was upset. He put a hand on his friend's arm to help reassure him. Thank you, Ida. Ida seemed to soften at that, standing more upright and smiling quickly before it turned back into a frown. But you had no reason to worry us all like that. He scolded him. Honestly, it was just a sign that Ida was still okay to Midoriya. Hey, it's not like he planned to come back from the dead, Kirishima joked, throwing an arm around Midoriya's shoulders. Yes, but he should have been more careful not to get harmed in the first place, Ida argued. I'm sorry, Ida, Midoriya said. I didn't mean to cause this, to make any of you worried or have to go through what you did. Ida seemed to accept this as a reasonable response just as Todoroki approached him. Midoriya. He greeted him. Todoroki looked as he usually did, but Midoriya didn't miss the way his hands were fisted at his sides. You're not planning on dying again, are you? What? Todoroki. Of course not. Midoriya shouted, shocked at the blunt question. Though it was Todoroki he was speaking to, so he should have expected nothing less. I didn't even plan on this. He added. Did you know about your crazy second quirk? Kirishima asked, arms still slung around Midoriya. Midoriya just shook his head, his eye being caught by Kacchan. He was moving off of the sofa where he had been sat, fuming, since Midoriya walked in. His face looked more set off than usual if that was possible. He came to stand in front of Midoriya, arms crossed, staring intensively at him. This is when Kirishima found it best to move away. Midoriya didn't know what the boy would be feeling, but he wouldn't have been shocked if Kacchan punched him. He scoffed, pointing his face away. Of course you would pull something like this, Deku, he swore. Midoriya couldn't help but smile slightly, now knowing that Kacchan was actually affected by his death. Despite how horrific it was, and what he imagined Kacchan went through, he was actually touched to realize it. So, you're going to live forever now? Shinso asked, appearing on Midoriya's left. Well, Midoriya started. It seems I am still aging, he explained, remembering what the doctor told him after they did some further testing. The quirk doesn't seem to stop that. And that was something Midoriya had considered when he realized what it meant. Was he going to live forever now? Would he have to watch everyone around him die as he continued to live and grow older and older and older and older and older, and he wanted not to think about it, at least for now. It was something he could worry about later in life. There was always a way to stop a quirk for a while or cancel it out. He promised himself that he wouldn't stay up every night worrying about it. How come it took you so long to wake up? Shinso asked. They think it has to do with how intensive the injury was. It took a long time for my body to heal it, he mentioned, resting his hand against where his newest scar was across his chest. The scar was a nasty one, but it was always going to be a reminder of the first time he revived himself. It had started to turn into a strange canned A session after they got comfortable on the sofas, the banner now hung up over the windows. Everyone was asking him everything they could think of about his newest quirk. What happens if you, get disintegrated or something? Zero asked. I'd rather not think about that, Midoriya said, rubbing the back of his head, which was a sign that he was starting to get a little uncomfortable with all the questions. It was mainly because he didn't know the answers himself, and it was overwhelming having to think about all the different ways he could now die over and over again. Hey, leave the shitty nerd alone. Oh, he hadn't expected Kachin to go to his aid. It's obvious he doesn't want to answer your lame butt questions. Although it did dim the mood, Midoriya was thankful for the rescue and smiled at Kachin to let him know. Kachin, in response, scoffed at him and mumbled something that Midoriya couldn't quite hear. Deku, Uraraka appeared in front of him, taking the moment's silence to speak up. She grabbed his hands and stared intensively into his eyes. We are so happy that you are alive. She spoke with such sincerity that Midoriya could already feel the tears building in his eyes as he looked upon all the genuine happy faces of his friends. Thank you. I'm glad to be alive. It had been a month since what they had all come to call the resurrection. Sure, it left something extra for some of them to talk to their therapists about, but Midoriya hoped that everyone was doing better. There were still some questions and disbelief, but classes and training had taken over most of their attention. In that time, Aizawa-sensei introduced them to the big three of UA, who was to help them with their hero work studies that they were starting earlier than they usually allowed due to the threat of villains. It was exciting. It reminded him that everything had returned to normal and things were still the same as it was. But some things had changed. He was used to having Todoroki seek him out sometimes when he needed someone to talk to, but now sometimes he would open the door late at night to find Todoroki standing there, wanting to check that he was still there. Uraraka had been trying to spend more time with him. She mentioned that although knowing he was going to be okay, she forgot how short life could be and wanted to start making more memories. He had thought it sweet and had started accepting it when she suddenly started bringing a camera out everywhere to get pictures of everything. Even Shinso found more reasons to come into his dorm room, and usually it was to play video games together. He found that Shinso would keep looking at him out of the corner of his eye, and he would ask if he was okay, if he was really okay all the time. Midoriya always reassured him that he was and would be. It had taken some time before Midoriya learnt about the nightmares Shinso kept having of him. Kachin had nearly been the same. He was still snarky, rude, and ready for a fight. But sometimes, Midoriya caught the way he seemed to simmer down when looking at him, like he was reminded by what happened and it affected him. Midoriya had tried to talk to him about it, but as usual, he wouldn't have it. Midoriya was almost tempted to offer him a fight or one-on-one training to see if that would help, but he didn't want to risk getting in trouble again. He had already caused enough trouble. It wasn't until about a week and a half after his return Kachin actually cornered him after class training one day. So, you can't die? He opened the conversation with, which just confused Midoriya. He thought that was a basic fact by now, but he was willing to have the conversation, so he just went along with it. Yes, he replied, standing on edge in case Kachin did try to surprise attack. But the boy was just standing by the door that leads into the hallway with his arms crossed, a puzzled look on his angry face. It's your quirk, isn't it? Kachin said like it was a statement, not a question. Midoriya couldn't help but give him a bewildered look in response. Don't give me that shitty face, Deku. I know about your secret with All Might. I know that isn't your biological quirk, and I'm not an idiot. I never said you were. Shut up. Kachin shouted. So, this is your quirk, yeah? Midoriya understood what he meant. Yes, it seems to be my quirk. Kachin scoffed and started to walk off, through the doors, but he stopped for a moment and looked back at him. Lame. Perfect quirk for your shitty but Deku as you can't seem to stop trying to nearly die. Kacchan dash. You need to be better than that if you want to become a hero. He said as he let the door shut behind him. Midoriya was honestly a little stunned, but he was also touched when he understood what Kacchan had meant. And he agreed he did need to get better, get stronger to become a better hero. He couldn't rely too much on this new quirk in future battles, especially with its awkward side effects. Unfortunately, nothing was easy and the world really did seem to have it out for him. A group of them decided that they wanted to go out and spend the day in the city, celebrate together before they had to go on to their hero studies for a while and would be seeing less of each other. Midoriya was up for the trip, excited about the idea of going to that merchandise store that could possibly have the new All Might winter gloves. Most of the class actually turned up for the excursion, and it wasn't long before they had separated into groups, all running into different areas of the city center. Midoriya may have spent a little too long in that merchandise store, leaving him with Todoroki, who was the only one willing to wait for him. "I'm sorry, Todoroki, I didn't realize what the time was," he apologized, tucking the bag with his new All Might gloves under his arm. "It's all right, I don't mind," Todoroki coolly replied. Midoriya had asked him if there was anything that he wanted to do whilst they were in the city, but Todoroki told him, in the nicest way, that he didn't care what they did. "Let's see if we can catch up with Yaoyorozu, Jiro, and Kaminari. They were heading to that cafe Aoyama mentioned, right?" he asked, even though he already knew they were heading in that direction. It was already getting a little dark, but they didn't have to be back at dorms until 8 p.m., which still gave them enough time. "Is that smoke?" Todoroki asked, pointing to where there was a large plume of smoke engulfing the sky, only about 2 streets away from them. The two of them didn't even need to say anything to each other. One nod and they were already jogging towards it. They weren't heroes, yet, but that didn't mean they were going to walk past anywhere where someone could need help. As they turned a corner onto the street, they saw the extent of the fire that was causing all the smoke. If a burning building wasn't a giant red flag of danger, a whole street of burning buildings should have been a whole alarm system. Todoroki didn't hesitate to run directly towards the closest building, ice on his hand ready to help cool some of the flames. Midoriya knew there wasn't a lot he could do in the situation. He couldn't exactly punch the flames away, and he could already hear some sirens in the distance that signaled help was on its way. But Midoriya didn't want to be useless, so he quickly dropped his bag, grabbing the present mic scarf he had also thankfully bought and wrapped it around his mouth as a makeshift mask for the smoke. He ran into the nearest house, wanting to make sure that there wasn't anyone in there that needed help. It didn't go according to plan though when there was someone in the building, and they kicked him straight in the chest, forcing him to nearly fly out of the house. "Stupid kid," Midoriya could hear the man muttered over the crackling of the increasing flames. He vaguely recognized him. "Oh, he was one of the villains from the training camp." "Midoriya," he heard Todoroki call out. The floor sudden frosted over as Todoroki appeared next to the boy. He quickly cast a wall of ice between them and the villain, that Midoriya could not remember the name of, but because of the fire, it had already started to melt. "Oh, he heard the man said. "Sure, why not?" Suddenly the wall of ice was completely gone, the man rushing directly at Midoriya with a hand of blue fire. He was about to grab his face. He was going to burn it. Thankfully his reflexes had gotten a lot better, and by activating 10% he could drop down faster, moving out of the way as the man nearly threw himself on top of him. Unthankfully, the fire had gotten a lot closer already and Midoriya could feel it liking at his knees. Curse his casual clothing having none of the protection his costume had. He kicked his left leg up in attack, just about swiping the guy's leg. It caught the man off balance as he fell to the floor. Todoroki didn't waste any time in pulling Midoriya up and dragging him out of the house. The building was starting to crumble, and it was too dangerous to stay in there. "Who is?" Midoriya didn't get to finish his question as a dagger sped past the gap between his and Todoroki's head. He turned to see who had thrown it at the same moment Todoroki had thrown up another small ice wall, blocking the fireman who had found his way out of the house himself. "I haven't got my license," Todoroki mentioned as he could already see the ice melting again. Midoriya wanted to tell him that it didn't matter at that moment, that they could put it down to self-defense, but then he did see someone he definitely knew. It was that lizard man from the training camp. These were definitely members of the League of Villains. "You're that kid who broke my sword," Lizard Man screamed, pointing wildly at Midoriya. He threw another dagger at them, aiming at Todoroki. This one was a strange color for a weapon, but Midoriya just activated another 10% to jump and kick it out of the way. And that is how the fight started. It was strange. Midoriya realized as he was dodging attacks from in front and behind, they weren't attacking to kill them. The two villains were holding back, and he didn't know why. Todoroki realized that his fire was near useless against the fireman. It was only causing more damage, but his ice was melting too fast. Whoever this person was, their fire burnt a lot hotter than his. Todoroki built a massive bridge of ice between the two of them, hoping it would take the fireman a while to burn through. Midoriya found it rather easy to take down the lizard man. Spinner, he remembered, was his name. Apart from weapons, he didn't have any other form of attack. But the fire was hot, too hot. Midoriya could feel himself sweating heavily. And the smoke didn't help either. He could tell that he had breathed a bit too much in and could feel himself getting a little lightheaded. But even so, Midoriya had been careful not to get hit. Destroying everything sent at them with a kick had been easy enough. He should have knocked them all down though. He honestly didn't think much when Spinner threw a strange block-like weapon towards him and simply dodged out of the way. But then he was quick to realize that he hadn't been aiming for him. The fireman quickly grabbed the block, which turned into a sword upon contact, a flaming sword. And he was fast. It was the first time one of them was going in for the kill, and he was aiming for Todoroki. He was going to kill Todoroki. But Midoriya could be quicker. He really wants to say that he tried his best not to get killed again so soon. But that, unfortunately, would have been a lie. Nothing had changed for Midoriya. If he saw someone in trouble, new quirk or not, he was going to help save them. Even if that meant risking his own life. But he really didn't mean for it to happen. Maybe he was really as reckless as everyone kept berating him for. He knew he was going to worry so many people, distress them, and he told them all that he would be careful. But perhaps he was just that unlucky, he wondered as he found himself taking the attack. Death by a flaming sword. Yeah, that sounded about right. Oh, he felt this one. It hurt. It really hurt wholly. It felt like his insides were on fire. He rationally knew they weren't, that it was just the pain from the attack. Was that the sound of sirens? Where had the villains gone? Kill him and run. How rude. What was happening? Oh right, dying, that hissy. Oh, it hurt. This wasn't like the first time. What was happening? Oh, he was in Todoroki's arms. He was dying in Todoroki's arms. Poor Todoroki, he couldn't help but think as his mind started to get foggy and the pain started to recede. I'm so sorry. And then, Midoriya Izuku was dead again. Where am I? He couldn't feel anything, everything felt wrong again. Again? That didn't make any sense. This hadn't happened to him before, had it? Actually, he realized he couldn't remember if it had or not. He couldn't really remember a lot. His head was starting to hurt. The process of waking up quickly became a painful one. By the time he had opened his eyes, to a blinding white ceiling, everything went from not feeling anything to suddenly feeling everything. It was like all of his nerves sparked back to life at once. It hurt. He tried to move his arms, his body, just to try and relive some of the discomforts, but found he could barely move. Alarm bells started ringing in his head. He was trapped. He was trapped. He was trapped. Why was he tied down? He could see it now. He was strapped down to a cold and very comfortable bed. It wasn't right, it was wrong. He had been there before, done something comparable before, that, at least, felt familiar. What did he have to do? He had to leave. Yes, that was right. He needed to get out of there. He needed to find someone. Why was this room familiar? Green lightning sparked across his body on instinct, and he pulled at the restraints again. This time they snapped off him instantly. He sat up on the bed, the pain fading into a faint tingling sensation. The room was very plain. There were curtains and machines and, oh, a door. What was that? What was that sound? He could hear someone talking on the other side of the door. We have to remember when he wakes he is going to be very confused and he might not even recognize anyone. Were they talking about him? He needed to leave. Even through his foggy brain, something was telling him he couldn't go through the door where there was possible danger. But then his eyes caught sight of the windows on the other side of the room. He saw a potential exit. Getting off the bed was easy enough, his legs wobbled with the first few steps, but it quickly became easier. He eventually reached the windows and looked down through them. It didn't seem too high, maybe. Something was telling him that he could easily jump it, that it was okay and to trust himself. He went to open the window, and he quickly gathered, ow, his arm hurt, that the window couldn't open. But he could hear more noise outside of the room. He had to leave now. The room wasn't safe. He went to activate his power, planning on smashing through the windows, but then something was tying itself around his ankle. It was a rope or bandage-like thing. It wrapped itself up his leg and pulled him away from the window. Midoriya, stop. He followed the bandage to see it was attached to a scruffy-looking man now standing in the room with him, and there were two others behind him. You need to calm down. Who were they talking to? He didn't recognize the voice that spoke, but he loosely recognized the person. Did he know him? Was he good? It didn't matter. He reactivated his power, his quirk, and leant down to yank the bandage off of him. He was able to rip it off just as the man tried to pull at it again. He didn't care who this was. He moved into a fighting stance, something that felt right, the comfort of the lightning tickling over his form. I need to leave. Midoriya. No, he wouldn't give him the chance. He jumped forward, ready to kick the man out of the way, but then something happened and he found himself hitting the floor. No! He cried. Not safe, not right. I need to get out of here. He screamed, looking up at the man whose hair was now floating around his face. He looked disappointed. Why did that make him feel bad? Where was he? Midoriya, you need to stop. You are going to hurt yourself further, or someone else. Izuku, honey. Izuku, that sounded right. Why did it sound right? It sounded familiar. Right, that was his name. It's okay, we're here to help you. He looked at the woman, next to the scary floating hair man, and he knew her. Why was she crying? Something to do with him. What was he doing? Izuku, please. That was his mum. She was safety and warmth and comfort. She was good. He scrambled to get himself off of the floor and, ow, his arm hurt, but he knew that, right? He did remember stuff. He had to calm down. He knew he had to, but it was too much. Everything was overwhelming, and no matter how much he told himself to calm down, it was like the rest of him wasn't listening. It was like he wasn't fully whole yet. Deep breaths, kid, we have done this before, the scary hair man said, whose hair was now back to its normal non-gravity-defying state. He had taken a step closer to him but still looked hesitant to come any further. Do you remember? No, he didn't. But at the same time, there was something very memorable about it. He wanted to remember. Who? What was he doing? Who? Why can't I? It's okay. You are very confused, but it's okay, we are here to help you. They were here to help, everything was going to be okay. He could feel his body relax slightly, suddenly not feeling so on edge. I'm tired, he found himself saying. You will be, the third person in the room spoke up. This person Midoriya did not recognize at all, there was nothing familiar about him. You are in a hospital, you injured yourself. Don't worry, everything will slowly come back to you. The long white coat the man was wearing meant something. Something to do with healing and help. When, I don't know what is happening. He stuttered, looking at the three concerned faces. He didn't like that. We need you to get on the bed so we can help. The third man explained. Your arm is hurting, yes? Yes. Was it? He looked down at said arm, his left one, and he noticed that there was a strange glove-like thing on it. A brace? He didn't normally wear one, it had to do something about it hurting. And when he thought about it, it wasn't the only thing that hurt. The space on his right side, at the bottom of his ribs, hurt. The whole area felt tight and hot and uncomfortable. He didn't like it, but the pain of it was important. There was something very important about the pain there. Something where he was going to disappoint people. Something to do with a quirk. His quirk. What was his quirk again? Yeah, that's right, Us. He watched as the green lightning appeared again, and the red markings crossing around his arms. That was his quirk. As soon as he activated it, it disappeared again. Kid, you have to stop doing that. Doing what? He looked back up to the people and, when did his mum get there? When did Aizawa-sensei get there? Were they always there? But why did Aizawa-sensei have his quirk activated? He looked behind him, expecting to see someone there, but there was no one but a wall of windows. Had he missed something? Midoriya, can you please get on the bed? Yes, he could do that. It had something to do with his arm, right? He remembered that. Aizawa was going to kill the kid himself. He knew that this would happen. Midoriya, despite all their warnings, got himself killed again. Aizawa just knew that this was going to become a common problem in the future. He had got called out to find a traumatized Todoroki and dead Midoriya. Todoroki hadn't taken the whole experience very well. He just kept asking. He's definitely going to wake up again? It wasn't a one-time thing? The poor kid was so scared about his friend and refused to leave his side. It was as if he wouldn't believe it unless he saw it. He eventually had to send the kid back to the dorms, covered in Midoriya's blood. God, he really needed to get these kids a therapist. It had been 3 days since the second time Midoriya died when he got a call from the hospital. Midoriya was alive again, not awake yet, but was living once more. He wasn't really shocked that it was so fast compared to the last time, as the whole situation was still unpredictable. So he made his way to the hospital, meeting up with Midoriya's unfortunate mother again. He pitied the poor woman to find one Midoriya about to smash his way through the windows. He knew that the kid was going to be confused and not remember anything, but he wasn't expecting that. Thankfully they were able to calm him down and he had started to regain his sense quicker than before. It has only been a month since the last incident, Aizawa said to the flustered boy. It had been 2 hours since they entered the room, Midoriya back on the bed and nearly back to normal, after having a quick nap. He figured it was okay to start talking about what had happened. I wasn't going to let him die, he was talking about Todoroki, when I knew that I could save him. I don't think that counts as reckless? He asked, not sure himself. He had a frown on his face like he was forcing himself to think straight and remember everything correctly. I don't know if you getting this quirk was a blessing or a curse. Maybe he should start a betting pool with the other teachers. How long until Midoriya gets himself killed again? Aizawa would bet 2 weeks with the rate the kid was going. He caught the eye of Midoriya's mother, who was sat on the other side of the bed to him. She looked at him nervously, like she didn't want to agree but couldn't find a reason not to. Aizawa sighed. You don't realize that by you doing this, you leave a lot of people to deal with it. I wasn't going to allow them to kill Todoroki. That was the first thing the kid said with no hesitation or stutter. I'm not saying that you should. You did the right thing in stopping them, it's your methods I am questioning. Didn't you think there was any other way of stopping them that didn't lead to you getting impaled? That was a no. You have gone this long in your life without repeatedly dying, you need to improve your defense skills if you want to be a hero. We warned you last time, you cannot rely on this new quirk. Aizawa dreaded to think what would occur if something happened to the kid with no one around to help him, or if he was left dead with a villain. He knew that once they found out about this, there would be a chance for them to take advantage of it. But he wasn't going to say that with Midoriya's mother there. He knew she wasn't completely positive about UA, he didn't want to add to that issue. I'm sorry. It's okay. I'm proud of you for saving Todoroki. Midoriya hadn't asked yet about what happened to the villains they fought, or why they were there. He did ask if Todoroki was okay once he remembered the fight though. He knew it wouldn't do any good for the kid to hear the truth just yet, about how much it had affected his friend. He just told him that Todoroki would be. Because he was sure that he would after some time. Todoroki had given him and the police a statement about what happened, with the arson of residential homes to the 2 known League of Villain members being there and attacking them. It was something that was being looked into by the pro heroes, but the League was known for being tricky to follow, even after their boss All For One was imprisoned. But right now, he had to focus on the kids. Dr. Miura, the same doctor who had dealt with them before, walked back into the room. My favorite patient, he joked, taking his place at the end of the bed. How are you feeling? I know that is a stupid question, but how is the short-term memory loss? You back with us yet? Yeah, I think I remember everything, Midoriya replied. vaguely playing with the arm brace again. Well, you gave us quite a show when you woke up, but we were expecting it. Dr. Miura spoke casually. When you woke up, you tried leaving through the window. Do you remember why? Oh, yeah. It was easy to see how embarrassed that question made Midoriya. I vaguely remember having this feeling that I had to leave. It's what happened when I woke up in the morgue as well. It could be your body's natural instinct to get to somewhere it knows it's safe, like the school. That made sense. All the kid kept going on about when he tried to stop the boy from smashing out of a window was that he needed to leave. Aizawa had first wondered if there was a threat that they were unaware of, but Midoriya didn't make sense, so logic played out that it was a strange part of the side effect. You did come to sense a lot quicker this time. We can't be sure if this is because the quirk is improving itself, because the injury was smaller and took less time, or simply because we were here to snap you out of it faster. I'm afraid these are all unknowns until the quirk has been used several times and we can see the results, but as said before, it's not something any of us want to test. Don't get any ideas, problem child, Aizawa warned, giving Midoriya a very hard stare. The boy at least looked nervous. Hopefully we will never know. Midoriya's mother spoke up. She had sat there silent for most of the time in the room, simply taking everything in with worrying looks. Hopefully you will never have to use this quirk again. Mum dash. I know, Izuku dash, she snapped, looking somewhat infuriated at the kid. I know, she repeated softer. There was an awkward moment before Dr. Miura, thank God, decided to speak up. Would you like me to go through the injury, or would you prefer to do that later? Aizawa caught the way he looked nervously at his mother before saying, now please. Dr. Miura then listed off all the injuries they could find at the time he was brought in. He had been stabbed by a flaming sword. Yes, that was right. The sword had pierced through the liver, breaking 2 of his ribs, and causing internal burn damage. They believed that the cause of death was internal, external bleeding and shock. But it was hard to be sure without a full examination. But when he was brought into the hospital, it was under instructions to not interfere with his quirk. He had also badly sprained his arm, hence the brace that they put on, knowing his body wasn't likely to heal it for him. But the other wound had fully healed, ribs and all. Midoriya took this all in his stride, simply nodding along as he listened. We are going to ask you to stay in overnight again, just so we can get in you, and check you for any other injuries now that you are awake. The kid just nodded his head, and Aizawa just knew how much of a headache he was going to cause over the next 3 years. The first time Midoriya died, Todoroki felt lost and a little numb to everything. The second time, Todoroki was sure his body shut down. He had seen Midoriya dead on the pavement before he was pulled away the first time. But this time, he died in his arms. Todoroki watched as Midoriya died, the seconds passing by very slowly. The boy had pretty much fallen against him, taking the attack before Todoroki could blink. Midoriya was in pain, so much pain. And there was nothing that Todoroki could do. It should have been him that got stabbed. Midoriya should have not had to die for Todoroki's failure. If only he'd been quicker. But Midoriya's eyes were wide, he was bleeding out so fast, oh there was so much blood, and he was choking on the air in his throat. Todoroki could do nothing but watch as the light left his friend's eyes and his body went stiff. There was nothing he could do but watch his friend die in his arms. He knew that it would be okay, that Midoriya would be okay. He couldn't die. But despite that knowledge, what Todoroki experienced wouldn't stop playing in his head. He couldn't die. He couldn't die. But he had watched him die. It's okay, kid, you did good. Aizawa-sensei kept repeating. He remembered that after the stabbing the 2 villains had run off. It seemed like that final attack panicked them or something. They had taken Midoriya away, but he didn't want to leave him. He wanted to make sure that he wasn't going to wake up alone. He wanted to make sure that he would be okay. He had to be okay. But Aizawa-sensei told him that it would take days, maybe a week, before he would wake again. There was no point in waiting around for him. Aizawa-sensei had taken him back to the dorms, asking if he wanted to return home. No. He needed some time to himself to deal with what happened, and he didn't want to have to burden his sister again. It was after the class's 8 p.m. curfew, which meant that, unfortunately, he walked into the common area where everyone else was. Todoroki! Shiro was the one who noticed him first. "Where's Deku?" We wondered what happened to. He'd hoped no one would see him or pay any attention to him. He wanted to just get to his room without having to deal with anyone. "Oh my God!" one of the girls screamed. He regretted the choice of a white shirt. It was no longer white, now stained red with Midoriya's blood. There was so much of it. Todoroki? Oh right, they were expecting an explanation. Midoriya's dead, again. Everyone lost their minds at that, but thankfully that was when Aizawa-sensei finally entered the dorms, and Todoroki left it to him to deal with his rambunctious classmates. Todoroki didn't know how long he sat on his bed before he finally decided that he needed a shower, that he needed to get the blood off of him. He could still replay the exact moment, almost like it was in slow motion, of when Dabi, yes, that was his name, the man who seemed more than familiar, closed in on him and he went to block it with ice, but he was too slow. Too slow. And then Midoriya was in front of him, faster than him. He needed to get quicker, and took the attack. He could still feel the pressure of Midoriya's body in his arms. He knew that Midoriya would be okay. But he couldn't stop thinking if it had been anyone else, someone who would stay dead, that would have died in his arms because he wasn't good enough. He didn't need to go to classes the next day. He'd been told he could have some time off to help deal with what happened. But he didn't want to be left to his thoughts stuck in his room all day. Aizawa-sensei also said that he would inform them when Midoriya had woken again and he didn't want to miss that. He hoped that going to class would help distract him, but he forgot that he had to look at the empty desk where Midoriya usually sat. "I can't believe the shitty nerd got himself killed again already for FS sake," he heard Bakugo grumble at his own desk. It would seem that they would have to get used to this. It was the third day of Todoroki trying his best to cope when Aizawa-sensei informed them that he was awake. It was towards the end of the day so they couldn't really go and see him, but he told them that he would be returning the next day. Todoroki appreciated it when Aizawa-sensei had pulled him to the side and asked if he wanted to go and pick Midoriya up from the hospital the next day with him. He didn't hesitate to say yes. He wanted to see him because, despite Aizawa-sensei saying that he was okay, he needed to see it with his own eyes to believe it. Walking into that hospital room was like something had lifted off Todoroki's chest. He could finally breathe again. Because there was Midoriya, sitting on the edge of a hospital bed saying goodbye to his mother. Midoriya grinned when he spotted him, and Todoroki didn't know what to do in response. His mother left the room, which only left the two of them. Aizawa-sensei stuck filling out all of the release forms. "I'm so sorry, Todoroki," Midoriya said, jumping off the bed. He looked tired but oh so alive. Todoroki could see the flush of his skin, the way he shifted on his foot, the way his face turned nervous at the lack of Todoroki's response. He looked alive. Todoroki gave him a small smile in return. "Please never do that again." None of them knew when shitty Deku would be arriving back after his time in the hospital. So none of them was really prepared when he walked into the dorms, that half and half BSTRD trailing after him, a couple of hours after classes had finished. It was only Bakugo, Kirishima, shitty hair, Kaminari, dunce face, and Mina, raccoon eyes, sitting in the common area. The others had somehow roped Bakugo into helping them with their English homework, and they had been waiting on Shiro, soy sauce, to join them. "So you went and got yourself killed again, huh?" Mina teased as they greeted the nerd. It had been 4 days without Deku. He was too busy being dead. Lame but couldn't even stay alive, and he wanted to be a hero. Bakugo would have laughed if the situation wasn't so morbid. Icy Hot wouldn't say anything when he first came back, wouldn't speak to them, so they had to rely on Aizawa-sensei for their information. But Bakugo saw the blood and the fact that Todoroki was soaked in it. Whatever happened, it was nasty. He'd seen blood before, been injured enough, but he doesn't think he's ever seen that much. And something was daunting, suffocating about it. He knew, rationally, that he would have to get used to it. Blood and injuries were a part of their job now. It was a consequence of being a pro hero. But not when it was Deku's. He never expected to see the BSTRD after leaving middle school, but now the nerd had taken his place as his rival. He was someone that Bakugo had to beat in order to become the number one himself. He couldn't allow Deku to overtake him. Just because Bakugo's idol All Might had chosen him. He wouldn't let anyone catch up with him. Deku was no exception to that. A hero should never stop fighting or give up, and there was nothing that Deku could do when he laid dead. Pathetic. Deku couldn't really die anymore. He knew that, they all knew that. The nerd would be fine. But Bakugo couldn't stop thinking about him, and it was pissing him off. He didn't want to keep thinking about shitty Deku and what it was like when he first thought him dead and not coming back. God, he thought, maybe he was the pathetic one. It hadn't felt quite real this time though. They didn't see him die, didn't see a body, so it just felt like he had gone away for a couple of days. That fact didn't stop Bakugo from grilling him though. Listen here, you stupid nerd. Bakugo screamed as he stormed up to an oblivious Deku. He grabbed the front of his shirt, pulling at it to make his point. What did I tell you? He screamed in his face. You need to be better than that if you want to become a hero. The ICBSRD seemed to take it as a personal attack when he grabbed at Bakugo's hand, pulling it away to release Deku. What are you, his bodyguard now? He screamed, yelling at the BSRD, who just glared in response. Kachin. Whoa guys, let's cool it for a bit, Kirishima said, appearing beside Bakugo to help defuse the situation. Bakugo clenched his fists, feeling the reassuring buildup of sweat in his palms. Kachin, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do it again. I know what you said, and I promise I will continue to get better so I can catch up. Deku said. Bakugo tore his eyes away from the ICBS's stare to see shitty Deku look so proud of himself. He wanted to explode his face. Or Todoroki's face. But he knew that it wasn't worth the trouble it would land him in. He wasn't angry with Todoroki, and he knew that. He was angry with Deku. You think you're the main character or something? He asked, taking a step closer to him until they were nearly touching. He could feel his own face fold up into disgust as he looked down at him. All strange sentiments built up as he looked at the shitty nerd's face. Looking at him was like looking at the picture of the funeral notice. It was his UAID photograph. The nerd even looked nervous in it, but he had that look of fierce determination that said Bakugo off. That look. It was the same one he was giving him now. You can't do anything right, can you? He shouted at him, trying to release his frustrations. But one shout was never going to be enough for that to happen with Bakugo. It was totally manly how you helped Todoroki. Kirishima, shitty hair, chimed in. He'd stepped in a little closer, trying to separate Bakugo a bit from Deku. Yeah, I would say so. Mina chimed in, pumping her fist in the air. Tisich, TNG nerds, all of them. Bakugo thought as he did take a step back, only to cross his arms as he noticed Deku look painfully sheepish at the being next to him. I'm sorry, Todoroki. You can stop apologizing, Todoroki replied coolly, giving Deku a small smile. Yesterday always tried looking nonchalant and cool. It set him off. We all missed you, even Bakugo here, why Kachin? Kaminari teased, nudging Bakugo in the side. Okay, maybe he could blow up someone's face. Shut your mouth, you demon extra. Why he bothered to deal with these people were beyond him. The only one he could handle was Kirishima, and that was only because he knew when to shut his mouth. I missed you guys too. Deku jeered. Well, from when I woke up and remembered, sorry, if Deku was going to keep apologizing, Bakugo really was going to kill him. It just made him look weak, and he couldn't have a weak but rival. Oh yeah, Aizawa-sensei said that you forget when you wake up? Mina pointed out. Yeah, like when we first saw you in the classroom? Kaminari asked. Deku nodded. It seems to be a side effect of the quirk. When I wake up I just can't remember anything. The doctors say it is because my brain hasn't caught up with my body yet. He explained. Bakugo remembered the vacant look on the nerd's face when they saw him for the first time in that classroom. He seemed like a ghost when he looked at them with no recognition. So you forgot again this time? Kirishima asked him, looking amazed at the whole idea. Bakugo watched Deku rubbed the back of his hair, the same thing he always did when he was nervous to speak. Some things never changed from middle school. Yeah, I didn't remember who Aizawa-sensei was. I nearly attacked him. Oh my god. And you're still alive. Kaminari whispered, like the shock of it wouldn't allow him to speak any louder. Trust you're dumb, but to have such a shitty side effect, Deku. Bakugo laughed menacingly. The nerd was alive and that would have to keep him satisfied for now. I'm sorry for causing so much trouble again. I'll do my best to make sure it doesn't happen again. Midoriya shouted, bent in a low bow, while standing at the front of the class. He thought it was only right that he apologized for making such a fuss again. He couldn't put Todoroki through that again, or any of them. It wasn't fair. Todoroki hung around his side more often, and he understood he couldn't apologize enough for what he had done. Though he made sure that the boy knew he would do it again if it meant that Todoroki was still alive. He didn't seem to like that response though. But Midoriya didn't want to lie to him. Thankfully everything got back into the swing of things fairly easier than before. But then something strange did happen. He was walking back to the dorms after going for a quick jog just before curfew hit. Everything stopped however when he saw a face on the side of the dorm building. Even his heart had stopped. "Hey!" the face said. Midoriya couldn't help but scream. There was a talking face in the wall. "You're that first year that keeps dying." "What? How are you doing that?" When Midoriya calmed his heart down he realized that he knew that face. It was one of the guys from the Big Three they had been introduced to before his recent event. Togata Mirio, that was his name. The upperclassman laughed. "I was expecting a bigger reaction. I thought I would surprise you, but I suppose compared to what you have been through nothing is that surprising anymore." Midoriya didn't know what to say. He was confused as to why this guy was even talking to him, especially as only a face. "You've been talked about a lot, so I wanted to see what the fuss was about. See you around." And with that, Togata was gone. Wait, what a strange encounter, Midoriya couldn't help but think. He wondered if the guy wanted anything else but to just see Midoriya with his own eyes. He wasn't too surprised to hear that he was being spoken about a lot. Not only was his newest quirk dramatic and caused a lot of issues, but he was also now known to be someone else with 2 quirks, which was rare. He decided it was probably best to ignore his strange encounter and to just focus back on his schoolwork. He couldn't afford to fall behind any more than he already was. It wasn't until the next class that the hero work studies were mentioned again and Midoriya realized that it could potentially be a good idea for him. He needed to grow stronger, to get better, and working with actually pro heroes was always a good idea. He had rung Gran Torino first, but he quickly regretted that when the conversation turned scary. He only wanted to ask if he would be willing to take him on again or not, but he got an earful about dying. The phone call did lead him to the idea of doing his work studies under Sir Night Eye however. But All Might was not happy about that idea. "I don't know if you going out on work studies is a good idea, young Midoriya, considering what you have been through recently. But I need to get better and stronger. I can't rely on this new quirk and I need to focus on our similar quirk. Sir Night Eye used to work for you, so who better knows about your quirk than him?" It turned out that one of the main reservations about the whole idea was simply because All Might didn't want to see the man. But thankfully help came in the form of Togata, who was already working for the man and was willing to help Midoriya. And so Midoriya began his time working for the agency. Everything was a mess. Sir Night Eye was injured badly. Togata had lost his quirk. Midoriya didn't even know what happened to Kirishima and Aizawa-sensei. Sir Night Eye had warned him that he was going to die. Midoriya couldn't allow that. He couldn't die again. He just couldn't make everyone worry about him again. It went against why he was trying to become a hero. He refused to allow that to happen. But he had to fight. His body hurt, but he refused to stop. People needed his help. People were relying on him. Eri was relying on him, and it was his job to protect her. Chisaki kept repeating how useless it was, how everyone there was going to die. The irony wasn't lost on Midoriya, but he didn't dare worry about himself. He refused to let anyone else die. He had to finish the fight quickly. He had to win before his body gave in. His arm, his leg. He couldn't. There was a chunk of rock impaled in both. The injury made them nearly useless. He'd been too slow to avoid the attack against Chisaki. He couldn't afford to be reckless in the fight. If he let Chisaki touch him, he could dissemble him, kill him. And Midoriya didn't know what would happen then. He didn't know if his quirk would work if he was split into dust. But despite that fear, he wasn't going to let the man get away. He had to stop him before he could go after Eri again. He had to save her. But then Eri came back, and Midoriya didn't know what to do again. It's so much easier to hurt yourself than to watch others hurt for you, right, Eri? That was like him. But he wasn't going to focus on that. Screw everything. Screw his pain and screw the villain's words. Screw how he was manipulating her. Eri, I'm going to save you. Chisaki was escaping to the surface with her. He couldn't allow him to leave with her. He couldn't abandon her again. He had to save her. Eri. He had her. He could grab her. Despite his pain and the falling rocks blocking his path, he did it. I've got you. She was in his arms, safe. He could save her. He would save her. And then he was flying. How was he using 100%? The feeling of confusion hit him. He hadn't forgotten something again, had he? He was okay. He had Eri on his back. They were going to be okay and safe. He had to smile, keep smiling for her sake. He landed back down safely, dropping her from his back to make sure that she was okay. He couldn't imagine what she must have been going through. He still didn't understand how he had used 100% of his power to escape when he was fine. There were no broken bones. There wasn't actually anything wrong. All of his injuries were gone and Eri, she was glowing. She'd done something. Eri, is this your quirk? He asked the scared girl. He didn't know if it was some kind of healing quirk, but it was amazing. He felt like he could fight again. Then all the pain hit. It was like his insides were burning again. He was exploding. He was dying. What's happening? She could rewind time. She could heal injuries. She could stop him from injuring himself. That was all he heard as Chisaki reappeared and explained her cursed quirk. He could use 100% and be safe. He didn't have to fear her ability. He didn't have to fear her killing him. He couldn't die. He was going to win. He did win. And then he thinks he died. Aizawa was too late. He didn't get to Midoriya in time before the girl's power overwhelmed and nearly ripped him apart. He had just enough strength left in him to get to where they were and check the body. Dead. Such a pain in the butt. He knew that the kid was going to be all right, eventually. He couldn't believe that he actually won the bet he created. 2 weeks, that is how long he lasted before he died again. He would grant Midoriya some sympathy, however. Chisaki was a formidable villain, and he didn't know how they would have won if it wasn't for Midoriya's sacrifice in the end. He could worry about Midoriya in a while. He wasn't going anywhere. He, however, had to calm the girl. It's okay, he will be fine, he said, crouching down to her level to comfort her. She was crying so hard he thought she was going to burst. No. I killed him. No, you didn't. Trust me. He had to speak up in hopes of her hearing him. Deku will be okay, he doesn't stay dead. She slowed her crying down to a sniffle, looking at him hopelessly through her large eyes. You're not just saying that? I'm not, he assured her. He went to put a hand on her shoulder but didn't know if that would be a good idea considering how out of control her quirk was. A few days and he will be . Did his body just move? That couldn't be right. He was definitely dead. Aizawa had checked, and he couldn't possibly be back already could. A sudden punch to Aizawa's face stopped every thought. Uraraka wanted it to stop. She wanted Deku to stop hurting, but he was 10 meters away screaming and suffering. She wanted to help, she wanted it to stop. And then, thankfully it did. She had Chisaki in her grasp to stop him from running off, but it seemed like Deku did such a number on him that he was too out of it to try. She watched as Aizawa-sensei made his way over to check on them, and by the way he crouched down and checked for a pulse, she realized what had happened. He had died. She couldn't believe that it had happened again. Sir Night Eye had warned them that it was going to happen, that he was going to die, but she didn't worry about it. Not because of his quirk, but because it was Deku, and if anyone could defy all of the odds it was him. But reality sunk in, and it wasn't the case. She needed someone to take Chisai so she could help Aizawa-sensei. A handful of police officers were heading her way and she was about to hand them over. All of her attention was taken by Aizawa-sensei suddenly stumbling backwards. There was, oh God, blood in his eyes. He'd been hit? She didn't know what just happened. Deku had died, right? Or did she understand wrong? He was standing up, his quirk was active and his eyes were glowing. Deku! She called out. Why would he attack Aizawa-sensei? He started to stumble. He was looking around crazed like he was looking for something, or he didn't know. It clicked. Aizawa-sensei had informed them, told them in detail that Deku became confused and lost when he was revived. He barely remembered anything. But if he had truly died, it was too soon for him to be awake. She had to get that girl, Eri, out of the way. Aizawa-sensei was trying to rub the blood out of his eyes. He was trying to get his scarf wrapped around Deku to hold him, but he was struggling. Deku's quirk was active and he had gotten hold of the capture weapon before it could tie around him. Eri was panicking. The poor girl was frozen as she watched the start of the fight. Uraraka needed to help. If she could touch him, use her quirk, it would disorient him enough to hopefully calm him down. Deku. The way his eyes snapped to her almost caused her to stumble. He looked like a wild animal with his manic eyes and scared expression. But he almost looked angry. She continued her plan to reach him, but she had never been as good a fighter as Deku, and it was like in a blink he was near behind her, leg raised to kick her. He was going to attack her. She knew she wouldn't survive taking the attack head-on. She had to dodge. Deku, please. You have to remember. He was going in for another kick. She needed to get him away from Eri. She couldn't afford for her to get injured by him. He was her hero. Deku. Nothing she was saying was getting through to him. It was as if he was deaf to everything. Her savior came in the form of tentacles wrapping around him whilst mid-attack. It drew him backwards. Sun Eater, no. The upperclassman was injured. He had Togata near dead in his arms. He couldn't fight. Despite how confused he might have been, Deku twisted in the air as he was dragged. He was wrapping the tentacles around his arm, using it to pull himself faster. His fist was out ready to punch Sun Eater, but Mrs. Ryukyu was quicker and whacked him back with her giant tail. Deku went flying back towards them. She didn't hesitate to move. Now was the best time she could use her quirk. She slapped him just before his body was about to hit the ground. Uraraka could feel the strain on her immediately. She was going to throw up, or pass out, or something, but she couldn't. Not when Deku needed her. Deku, please. I know you don't know who I am, but please. You have to stop. She screamed. It didn't do anything. He still had his quirk activated as he was floating, the lightning bouncing off his skin. It was building up like he was no longer aware of his limits. Aizawa-sensei. She screamed. She couldn't hold him much longer. She needed her teacher's help in stopping him. He had dealt with him both times he was like this. He knew what to do. Aizawa-sensei could finally see again when he used his quirk to cancel out Deku's. Uraraka, in a breath of relief, released him. The pressure on her body lifted as well. But she knew she couldn't stop there. Aizawa-sensei's eyes looked so painful. He hadn't got all the blood out, and she didn't want to doubt him, but she didn't know if he could hold Deku's quirk for long in his condition. The man had been so tired before this had happened. No. No and no. Deku was screaming. He was panicking and becoming distressed, and it broke Uraraka's heart. Aizawa-sensei had his capture weapon wrapped around Deku's arms, holding him in place so he couldn't move. Deku, she heard Eri say. The girl was so scared, she was crying again, and she looked as if the whole world was falling apart. She had her arm reached out. No, Eri, don't touch him. Aizawa-sensei called out. Her powers were too unpredictable. Uraraka didn't know how they worked, but she knew it caused him to use all of his power before, and they couldn't have that happen when they were his opponent. Thankfully the girl listened. Deku was staring down at her. His eyes were crazed and almost glowing. He looked berserk. He seemed to pause for a moment, his eyes searching her like he was trying to work out who she was. Maybe he recognized her. He stumbled back as much as he could, looking so lost. I. Aizawa-sensei blinked. Deku, it's okay. It'll be that was the wrong thing to say. The humming from his quirk seemed to get louder and he smashed his leg against the ground. In mere seconds the ground under their feet was opening up, cracking and falling apart, leading into the cavern they only just escaped from. There was so much screaming from everyone around her, everyone that was falling in. Uraraka quickly activated her quirk on herself to stop the falling. She needed to save everyone else. She needed to save Deku. Where was Eri? Oh God, Eri! The girl was falling, screaming as she clutched to the red remains of what seemed like a cape. She had to save the girl. Uraraka released the hold on her as she used the momentum to push herself to where the girl was. She just had to reach a little bit more. Just a little bit and she could. There. Uraraka activated her quirk as soon as she touched the girl, stopping her from falling anymore. She had her, she did it. She looked up and could see Aizawa-sensei being held by Azui. He was fine and she couldn't see anyone else in trouble from the attack. But she didn't know where Deku was. He didn't know anything. His heart was hammering in his chest and sweat kept falling into his eyes. He wanted to rest, to sleep, but he knew that something was so wrong. He needed to fight. Every inch of him just screaming that there was a fight to have. He was protecting someone. Himself? Was he protecting himself? There was that girl. Something about her screamed important. Someone was running at him. He had to fight. The ground was falling. He had to fight. People were screaming. He had to fight. Everything was falling into each other. His mind was spinning as quickly as his vision. He knew what this meant. He was going to disappear again. But he couldn't, not there where it wasn't safe. He needed to go somewhere safe. He was going to be fine. He was going to be safe. He was home. No, not home. Where he lived. Where did he live? Bakugo was frustrated. If not getting his provisional license was a kick in the teeth, not being able to go on hero work studies because of it was a kick in the ball. Instead, he was stuck at school continuing lessons as normal, while some of the others got to go out and be useful. Kirishima was out there. Even shitty Deku got accepted by an agency. They weren't allowed to say a lot, but he did know that they had gone out on some big rescue mission, a raid or something. It had to be something bad as it even took Aizawa-sensei away. Only half the class was currently in the dorms. The other half either at their hero work placements or out doing something boring. He himself was sat in the common area downstairs. He had just finished eating an early dinner before he was going to head back up to his room. He had that stupid English essay to finish, but at least he could do it with the knowledge that the others were going to be behind and stuck with a pile of work when they got back. He heard the front door of the dorms open and looked over in curiosity to see who had returned. But it was just Deku. Shitty Deku who, wait, he was supposed to be on that raid, right? Where were the others? He was just standing there, looking as useless as always, but he would at least normally greet everyone with that annoying voice of his. Bakugo moved around the table he was sitting at to see what the nerd's problem was. Oi Deku, what the hell are you? His costume was ruined. Both of the sleeves were gone and so were his gloves. 2 of his fingers were obviously broken and when he looked up there was a nasty cut on his forehead. The BS did he needed a nurse. He couldn't understand what the hell he was doing back at the dorms in such a state. Bakugo watched as the others downstairs with him looked over. Ponytail Yaoyorozu and Plain Face Zero, who were both by the table with him, also looked perplexed at the nerd's appearance. Are you all right? Yaoyorozu asked, looking at Deku with concern and suspicion. Deku just looked around the room, eyes landing on each one of them there. It was only the tail one Ojiro, dunce face Kaminari, and arm freak Shoji on the other side of the common room. But Deku just took his time looking at them, frowning. Who are you? F. Bakugo cried. What do you mean you BSTD? Had he hit his head or something? Stupid nerd couldn't do anything right. Deku, dude, what's going on? Kaminari asked, the idiot making his way over. I'm not, Deku? Oh shit. Oh shit. He forgot. Shitty Deku had forgotten who he was, and who they were. And Bakugo, he wasn't an idiot. He knew what that meant. You have got to be FNG kidding me? Midoriya Yaoyorozu tried to get his attention, whilst also taking a couple steps closer to him. Trust the geek to also get it so fast. Did you die? Midoriya, did you die? No, he hadn't. That was wrong. He couldn't die. He knew that. These people didn't know him. He didn't know them. Oh God, you think? Aizawa-sensei said that he doesn't really remember anything after he's immediately resurrected. But we saw him this morning. He wouldn't be back already if he died again, would he? Someone would have told us if he died, wouldn't they? Shut up. We know it takes the beating days for him to wake. Something's wrong. Something's wrong. Something is wrong. These people were talking about him, but he didn't know them. Midoriya, it's okay. It was the tall girl, the one with the big black ponytail. She was smiling at him, her hand reaching out of him as she took careful steps closer to him. We're going to help you, you can trust us. She was about to touch him, put her hand around his arm. No 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 and no and no no no. He remembers something. A piece of rope, or a scarf, wrapping around him. It was tight and stopped him. He couldn't move in it. That's what they were trying to do. He grabbed the offending hand and twisted the arm back. He didn't flinch at the way she screamed. But then he was hit backwards by a giant tail, forcing him to let go of the arm. The screaming had stopped, but he could hear them talking again. He couldn't focus on it though. It was like it was fading away from him, like a wall of static was in the way. Glowing red marks were wrapped around his body, lightning tickling his skin. It felt right. He had done this before. He noticed he was bleeding. He felt faint, wrong, something was wrong still. But every nerve in his body was alit. Ignore the pain, you need to be somewhere safe. These people were stopping him. Was he bleeding? Yes, ignore it. Why was he bleeding? It didn't matter, he could do this. He's been in worse, he thinks. He doesn't know when, but he knows that he had. None of them could believe what was happening. He had nearly broke Yaoyorozu's arm, and he would have if the tail guy didn't push him back off her. This was Deku, the hopeless spitting image of purity Deku. He would never do something so brash like that against one of his friends without warning. Bakugo knew that. He knew that Deku never fought dirty despite how frustrating that was. Something was. He would have never thought that forgetting who they were would cause him to violently attack them. That wasn't like Deku. Whoa, Midoriya! Kaminari unhelpfully shouted. What was that screaming? Glasses B. Ida had flew from the staircase. He must have used his quirk to get down so fast from his room. What is happening? Bakugo guessed it was quite a scene for him to see a quirk-activated Deku, his friend, standing against the group of them. The BSD doesn't remember us. Bakugo growled. He must have died and resurrected, Yaoyorozu explained, holding her now injured arm to herself. Midoriya? Ida asked, looking at him like he was expecting an explanation. Deku ignored all of them. He was looking forward, in between them, staring at nothing like he'd forgotten they were even standing there. His quirk was charging itself back up, the red marks and lightning growing stronger. His eyes were glowing. The only other time he remembered Deku looking like that was when they had fought in the school and got their butts chewed out for doing so. This was the Deku that was ready to fight for it all. In what seemed like a flash, Deku had rushed forward, ignoring the rest of them to aim at Ida. Thankfully, speed was the guy's thing, so he was able to move out of the way of the attack in time, leaving Deku to fly past him. Midoriya! He shouted, offended. Deku didn't pay any attention as he went back in for a second attack, only this time he went for Ida's ankles. Ida jumped up before the leg could make contact, but it was like Deku had expected that, and with his other leg kicked Ida backwards. Whilst speed was the glasses thing, strength was Deku's. Ida went flying back, slamming into several of the kitchen counters. They could hear the sound of glass smashing as the rest of them looked on in horror. What on earth? Bakugo looked to see that Mina and the stomach laser guy had both rushed down the stairs, also hearing the commotion from their rooms. Wait! Siro shouted, seeing that their voice had caused Deku's attention to turn onto the newcomers. They all moved at once. Bakugo didn't waste any time in rushing forward, explosions at the ready to attack. Ojiro, tail guy, followed at his side ready to get a hit in, and Siro had his tape ready to move Mina and Aoyama out of the way. He did so just in time as Deku punched where they were just standing, smoke washing off him where he had smashed in the staircase. What the hell dash? He could hear Mina scream as they went in for the attack. Deku dodged out of the way, using the momentum to kick Ojiro in the side, thus causing him to slam into Bakugo, knocking him off. Bakugo growled in frustration as he lost his close range. We have to stay on the defensive, we can't hurt him. He could hear Ida call out, getting up from where he was thrown in the kitchen. Hurt him? He can't die. What about us? Ida didn't seem to care what they thought as he rushed in, using his quirk to do so. He was able to get behind Deku, using his arms under his armpits to hold him. Midoriya, please. You have to stop this. Deku didn't say a word as he slammed his feet into the ground, using his quirk to make the area crack and become unstable. He went to lean forward and throw Ida over him, but Ida let go just in time. Deku turned, leg ready to kick, and Ida blocked it with his own arms. But the impact was too much and it caused him to land backwards into the wall. Deku didn't hesitate as he grabbed his friend's face and smashed his head against the wall behind him, knocking him out cold. Deku was serious. He couldn't remember any of them. And at the rate he was going to end them for it. There was a pause where none of them seemed to know what to do. They all thought this was a simple fight to calm Deku down, not something that would result in him smashing their heads. Aoyama was hesitant to use his quirk inside such a small space. It was too destructive for the environment, and Deku was just too fast anyway. Mina was also hesitant. She didn't want to hurt him with her acid, and Ida had cautioned them to stay on the defensive. Unfortunately, her quirk wasn't well suited for that, so she had to do her best to avoid his attacks and see where she could be beneficial. Yaoyorozu was injured. She was holding her arm to her body, but she did have a baton in her other hand ready to defend if needed. Shiro was their best bet. His quirk was perfect for capture, and that is exactly what they needed. Whilst Ojiro was distracting him, Shiro shot a stream of tape out, aiming to catch Deku's left arm and wrap it around his torso. Shiro nearly had the life scared out of him when Deku seemed to somehow sense the oncoming attack, knocking back Ojiro with a kick whilst grabbing the end of his tape. Shiro, though partially terrified, was always prepared for someone doing that and had his other elbow already shooting out to grab him. Luck was on his side when he was able to stick to Deku's arm and get it wrapped around, also tying his other arm that let go of the tape in surprise. He had him. Shiro had got his tape tied around Deku's waist, pinning his arms in as well so he couldn't escape. Bakugo would have never guessed such a lame quirk to be so useful to take down Deku of all people. But none of them was expecting the pure panic of Deku screaming. It was like the BSRD had become possessed. Get it off. He was screaming, his voice sounding raw. Even Bakugo could hear the loud humming of his quirk as it seemed to power up. The lightning off Deku's body sparked across the ground as he screamed and the tape ripped off of him. He hadn't finished as he grabbed the end of the tape that was still attached to Shiro, and he pulled. Shiro went flying towards Deku, unable to stop himself before he was caught in Deku's grip. "I'm sorry," Shiro said, sounding scared shitless before Deku smashed him against the wall, leaving a sizable dent. Bakugo knew he could not do anything. The demon nerd was going to kill his friends, and Bakugo knew he could never live with himself if he did. Bakugo was a hero. He was training to protect people, just like Deku. Only, Deku seemed to have forgotten that with everything else. Bakugo went in for the attack, explosion in his hand ready to blast. He had fought Deku many times before, he was the best one of them to fight against him. "Du." He was able to release an explosion on the side of his face, knocking him sideways. Bakugo went to do it again in the chest, hoping to wind him, but Deku jumped back, predicting that. He wondered if the nerd was starting to remember. But the sudden jump at him, leg raised to kick, begged to differ. Bakugo used his own explosion to push himself to the side to dodge the attack. As Deku flew past him, he grabbed his leg, swinging it downwards to knock him to the ground. Deku twisted in his grasp, using his other leg to hook around Bakugo's neck and bring him down with him. They both landed on the ground with a decent blow. Shoji, the arm freak dupli whatever, was suddenly behind Deku. He used his arms to wrap around him, holding him in place. But he didn't get his feet, and Deku used that to his advantage to swing upwards, pushing himself out of the grasp and spinning back with a kick hard enough to shove Shoji into the kitchen area. Bakugo blocked with his arms as Deku went for him again. He could feel the lightning from his attack hit his face. It felt numbing as it traveled across him. Bakugo didn't have much time as he watched Deku's arm glow dangerously red, pulling back for a large punch. Bakugo dodged, dropping down in time before the punch could land. He may be prideful, but not enough to not acknowledge that with how much power Deku was using he could have nearly killed him. Bakugo did get caught in the blast of wind that came from all the power of the punch. He had to close his eyes from the blast, and he didn't know what happened until he landed harshly on his elbow and sighed somewhere damp. He could feel the pain in his elbow from how he landed on it harshly. He looked up, fully intending to jump back into the fight, to see that he was now outside on the grass. The front of the dorms was missing. The nerd had ripped down the wall with his punch, leaving a massive gaping hole in the front of the building. Half of the furniture had got blown out with him, and the common area had become a near-waste zone. He wasn't holding back his punches. Bakugo knew what they had to do. There were a couple of ways to end it all. One was to knock him out, but that was what was proving difficult with Deku willing to fight at his max strengths, the strength of All Might. Two was to tire him out. He already seemed tired before he entered the dorms with his injuries, but Deku was a persistent BSTRD and was more likely to knock out most of the class before he went out. Third, kill him. This again wouldn't be easy, but if the BSTRD was dead they were safe, at least until he woke up again. The last idea, he has to remember. He muttered to himself. She hated this. But we have to make him remember us. He shouted to what was left of the class. Remember us? Kaminari screamed back almost hysterical. I don't think he can even hear us. Kaminari was trying to use his electrical attack, but he could only do it in small aimed doses without the risk of frying everyone else around him. Deku didn't seem bothered by this as he used the ceiling to spring off, avoid the attack, and knocking Kaminari out in one kick. The remains of the electricity just seemed to spark with Deku's own lightning. The BSTRD was unstable. Bakugo didn't want to admit it, but if only the icy hot BSTRD was there, then at least he could freeze Deku solid. But there was no point in dwelling on what they could have done when he should focus on what was happening. But then Deku stopped. He looked past where Kaminari now laid like he had realized something. His arm was hurting. Why was it hurting so much? He couldn't move some of his fingers. But that was okay. He knew that was okay. It was going to be fine. Once he was alive again. But wait, he was alive, right? But why didn't it feel like it? He couldn't remember being alive. Is Eri safe? Is Eri safe? Why did he ask that? He didn't know an Eri, did he? He hated this. But the name did make him feel something, protection. The name was the reason he was fighting, had been fighting. Who's Eri? Eri? Who the f was Eri? Why the F out of everything, was that what he FNG remembered? Who's Eri? Mina asked. Her fists were in a defensive form in front of her like she was prepared for an attack if she gained the wrong attention for asking the question. Eri, she's, Deku mumbled. It wasn't a lot, but it was something. The DMN nerd was starting to remember something at least. I have to protect her. There isn't an Eri here, Ida said. He had finally gotten up from where he had been knocked early. His dumb glasses were missing off his face and he had blood pouring from his nose. At least he wasn't dead. Midoriya. You have to tell us, what do you want? This is what they needed to do whilst he seemed subdued. They were all on edge, however, knowing that Deku could just jump on them at any time. You can't remember, but what is it you want right now? I want to be safe. It was Mina that responded, you are safe with us here. No. I don't know you. Deku cried, looking distressed again. His breathing started to level out though, getting less erratic than it was. Midoriya? He asked. I was fighting. The building started to creak. All the hits it had taken was obviously taking a toll on its structure. It was the last bloody thing they needed. I'm on it. Yaoyorozu shouted, seemingly noticing the same thing as him. Her arm was still injured, but she didn't hesitate to run to the edge of the room. Using her quirk, she was able to produce long, sturdy pole-like structures. She used them to prop up what remained of the wall. It wasn't a lot, but it was something and it would have to do. Yes, Ida called out. What else do you remember? For some reason that didn't seem to be the right thing to say as the distress poured off Deku and he went back to looking eerily focused. He must have been remembering some things, as he didn't hesitate to rip the belt off Aoyama when he rushed him. The guy was useless without that thing, they all knew that, and so must have Deku. He kicked Aoyama away screaming, the dust following as he heard the impact. Bakugo didn't waste time to get back in there. It was too much now. If he had to roast the DMN nerd, that is what he was going to do. Died you? He screamed, punching him in the torso, using the dust as his cover. Ida also used the dust as a cover as he used his engine-powered leg to kick Deku across the face, smashing him down. Ida went in for another attack, but his hit from early must have been worse than he thought as he was now slower than usual. It didn't take long for Deku to knock him backwards. "Where's Shinso?" "He's out," Ojiro called out as he swiped Deku's feet with his tail. But it meant nothing as Deku was able to land a kick in his chest. Deku was getting quicker and quicker. He was using too much of his quirk. Bakugo never felt dread, never, but there was something about seeing how Deku's body turned into shadows behind his lightning. He could barely see the expression on his face, just the glowing wide eyes searching for its next target. Deku's eyes locked with his own. Deku faltered, looking confused for a moment. Kachin? He remembered his name. Kachin. Bakugo couldn't believe he was the first one out of all of them that he had remembered, though he supposed it made sense considering how long they had annoyingly known each other. Of course you remember me first. You beastie, I hate that having name. Why are we fighting? I should be asking you that, you beastie, he screamed. In hindsight, screaming at him wasn't the best idea. He almost jokingly thought that it might have seemed familiar. But if anything, it caused him to draw back in. Bakugo didn't waste any time in going in for another attack whilst he seemed distracted. Bakugo realized too late that Deku knew the attack was coming but took it away. As the explosions blasted in his face, Bakugo felt a strong punch hit his stomach. And he was flying back again. Shinso couldn't believe his eyes. He had only been gone for under an hour, and he returned to find the dorm building nearly half destroyed. The front, where the door normally was a giant hole with remains of the common room knocked outside. All his classmates that weren't unconscious on the ground were fighting, and they were fighting against Midoriya, and he just didn't understand. Midoriya looked dead on his feet. He was breathing heavy and wheezed. His costume was in tatters, there was blood on his face, he could only see out of one eye, and his hands looked like they were broken. But despite that, he was glowing brightly with power, trying to attack the nearest person to him. Shinso! He turned at the sound of his name, surprised to see Irozu kneeling behind one of the discarded sofas, clutching her arm to herself. You have to use your quirk on Midoriya. You have to stop him. He had to, on Midoriya? He turned back to the fight to see Midoriya kick Shoji flying into the window, knocking him out of the remaining room. He could do this. This is what he was becoming a hero for. He ran into the room, carefully jumping over the ruins. He just needed to get a little closer. Midoriya! He screamed. Midoriya turned to look at him, no longer paying attention to Mina in front of him. Midoriya, can you answer me? He didn't, he just looked at him confused, lightning flashing up his arm to prepare for another attack. Do you know who I am? Come on, answer, just response, please. Midoriya paused, frowning. Nope, he had him. And then everything went black for Midoriya. Aizawa thought it was bad enough that some of his students ended up in the hospital due to the raid. But then he discovered that more of his students had been admitted, due to Midoriya. When he was first told, he thought he had heard wrong. But then he did remember what had happened. He had the nasty cut on his forehead and a broken, bruised nose to remind him. So at least he could understand how it had happened. Midoriya had woken up too fast and attacked everyone around him who he thought was a threat. Aizawa knew this cause he had seen it before. He would have been prepared for it if he hadn't woken up so quickly. He still didn't understand why he had awoken so soon, what had happened there, but he knew all the damage caused by the kid was simply out of fear and his strange survival instinct that came with the quirk. In hindsight, it was obvious where Midoriya was going to end up once he escaped them. The same place as last time. But Aizawa was barely conscious enough at that point to warn anyone. The kid made such a mess and everyone was so busy trying to recuse the situation. He thought that the other pro-heroes on the scene would help capture Midoriya. But he escaped them all. And headed to somewhere he felt safe. Kirishima, Uraraka, Togata, Amajiki were all in the hospital because of the raid. Ida, Shiro, Kaminari were all in the hospital because of Midoriya. His students, Class 1A, had to be moved out of the dorms until the building was fixed. He hadn't seen it, but Hizashi told him how much of a mess it was and how there was a risk of the whole thing collapsing if left for too long. They had really done a number on it. The moment that he was discharged, he made a mental plan on who to see in what order. He went to see Kirishima and Amajiki first, to check that they were okay. They both took big hits during the raid, but they survived, and after some time, they would be okay. They were stuck in a room with Fat Gum, and he knew that they wouldn't be going anywhere anytime soon, so he felt content to leave them to heal. He discovered that Uraraka had already been discharged. Her injuries weren't too bad, and it was mainly quirk exhaustion that got her. He found out about Sir Night-Eye. Togata was at his side as he passed. It was a horrible situation that he selfishly left All Might to handle whilst he tried to find the rest of his students. Ida, Shiro, and Kaminari were all in the same room, which made things a lot easier to handle. He wasn't surprised to find Uraraka in the room as well. It seemed like she found out what had happened after Midoriya escaped her. "I know, but..." He heard her mumble as he opened the door to the room. "I would have never imagined he would have done this. It can't be real. I should have stopped him. I nearly did, Uraraka stopped upon seeing him enter the room. She had tears running down her face. "Aizawa-sensei, I'm sorry, this is my fault." "Don't blame yourself," he said in his teacher's voice that Hizashi joked with him about. It was none of their faults, but he knew how much these kids loved to feel the weight of the world on their backs. It was that self-destructive trait that he was hopelessly trying to train out of them. But unfortunately, it seemed to be a curse amongst heroes. "No," he said firmly. She nodded weakly upon seeing that he wasn't going to back down, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "Aizawa-sensei, we are sorry we were unable to handle the situation." Ida called from his bed. All three of them were sat up and looked a lot better than he was expecting when he had been told of their injuries. Ida had a thick bandage wrapped around his head, and he wasn't wearing his usual glasses. "You handled the situation better than a lot could." There was a silence in the room after he said that. It seemed as if none of them knew whether to accept that statement or not. "It wasn't Midoriya's fault," Kaminari said, looking at Aizawa determined as if he was daring him to argue. The others in the room shared their agreement. Aizawa could have almost chuckled at the pride he felt for his students. "I'm glad to hear you say that." "They won't let us see him," Shiro said. "It's due to safety concerns. They need to be sure that all side effects have worn off and he remembers again," he explained. "He's going to blame himself, hate himself," Uraraka said. She was looking down at the ground, and Aizawa could tell that she was probably trying her best to not cry again. He probably would, Aizawa knew. "You have to let him know that we don't blame him, that is," Kaminari said. Aizawa knew how much he meant it simply by how serious he sounded. "Until we can tell him ourselves," Ida added. He didn't want to tell them that Midoriya probably wouldn't believe him unless they were the ones to say it. But they probably already knew that. On his way to Midoriya's room, he thankfully bumped into a doctor who was willing to update him on the situation. He gave detailed updates on everyone's situations, and how he was hoping to have Ida, Shiro, and Kaminari discharged soon. He informs him that Eri was okay, but was under short-term quarantine. All because of the danger of her quirk. Aizawa did stop by to check on her as well. This leads to a brief hypothesis of what they think led to Midoriya's actions. He is told that he is allowed to see the kid and that he will be allowed other visitors soon now that they confirmed he isn't a threat anymore and remembered everything. He remembered everything. And knowing how selfless and reckless the kid was, Aizawa knew exactly how much the situation would be tearing him apart. Aizawa would say that the kid looked dead if it didn't seem like such a bad joke. Midoriya was sat up on the bed, but it looked as if his entire body had been bandaged apart from his face. But even then he had a large piece of gauze on his forehead and his eyes looked bruised. Midoriya had made a mess of his friends, but it seemed it didn't come without consequences. Shinsu's quirk had stopped him, and it had given a chance for Bakugo to smash him across the head, knocking him out. It wasn't ideal, but the whole situation wasn't. "Kid," he said, trying to get his attention as he walked into the room. Midoriya didn't respond, he just continued to look at the bedsheets. His face was blank like he was stuck in a daydream. "Oi!" he said a little louder, hoping the sound of the door shutting would help as well. It seemed to snap Midoriya out of it as he looked over to where Aizawa was, a scared expression and a blush of embarrassment painted across his face. Sensei dash. Don't tell me they hit your head that hard." Foreshadowing would have warned him that it wasn't the best joke to make with the kid. Aizawa should have expected it, but the sudden waterworks did almost take him back. "I'm so sorry," Midoriya cried out, his body hunching over as his tears overwhelmed him. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." He started wailing, painful screams replacing his speech. His breathing started to hitch, it was coming out hard and strangled as his screams started to choke him. Sheet, the kid was about to have a panic attack. "I don't dash," he tried speaking again. "Midoriya, stop," Aizawa commanded. He walked the gap to the bed and leant over, placing one of his hands gently against Midoriya's bandaged hand, and the other on his back. "Midoriya, breathe. You're doing yourself no good by panicking." It took a couple of minutes, but his breathing did get better. It didn't stop the tears from rolling down his face, which Aizawa realized must have been painful with the bruising, but it was an improvement. "Right?" he said, believing it a good time to start talking again. He took the chair next to the bed, turning it to face Midoriya, but not letting go of the kid's hand. "Now, you are not in trouble considering the circumstance." "But I should be," he replied without missing a beat. His voice was now rough, the crying not helping. "No. You didn't know what you were doing." He watched as Midoriya's face scrunched up like he was frustrated. "I don't want this," he shouted. "I don't want to hurt my friends because I can't remember who they are. It's not ideal, but they are all okay. You took the brunt of the damage by overusing your quirk," Aizawa explained. The kid had broken his left leg, both of his wrists and 3 fingers. They were the major injuries, coupled with a decent handful of minor ones. It wasn't the worst he had ever been, but it was sure to place within the top 3. "I shouldn't have done any damage." Aizawa sighed. He knew that it was going to be a game of repeatedly reassuring the kid. "Your friends are willing to pay that cost for you being alive. If you didn't have this quirk, then they would still be mourning your death." "Maybe that." "Don't even finish that sentence." Aizawa nearly slapped his hand across the kid's mouth to stop him. "Maybe that would have been better. You just have to learn to stop getting yourself killed." "I didn't plan it this time." Midoriya sulked. "I know. The belief is that even after the quirk overwhelmed you and your body shut down because Eri was still touching you, your body responded to that. It was trying to rewind you back to life, but your quirk had already activated and they worked off each other. That is why you woke up immediately. It was too fast and your survival instincts were going haywire," Aizawa relayed, repeating what the doctor had told him. It did make sense. Is Eri okay?" The concern for the girl seemed to shock Midoriya back into sense. "She is," he confirmed. "She is here in the hospital having her own injuries treated." He'd avoid telling him about the quarantine and fever she had developed. He didn't need to worry about that amongst everything else. "She must hate me. I promised to save her." He curled back into himself again slightly. "And you did. Eri doesn't hate you. She thinks what happened with you was her fault," he explained. He wasn't 100% sure that was the truth, but he was certain it was. For the small moment he did see her, she just kept asking after him and apologizing. A lot like what Midoriya was doing. "She can't think that." Midoriya shouted, looking ready to jump out of the bed. "Oi, problem child, calm down. You can see her and talk with her when you are both better." Midoriya looked at him uncertainly, but Aizawa's harsh gaze forced the kid to retreat back into the bed properly, realizing that there was no chance of arguing against him. Midoriya sighed, looking back down at the bedsheets. At least he had stopped crying. "I don't know what to do if this happens again." Aizawa wanted to tell the kid to just not die again, but it wasn't that easy. He knew it wasn't something you always had control over. "We'll have to put something in place, but we will work it out." He was going to tell him that if they didn't sort something out, then he would have to be off the hero track. It would be too dangerous for those around him. But he would have a more in-depth discussion when the kid wasn't about to fall apart. He was sure that there was something they could do. Anything seemed near impossible nowadays. "We discovered that the League of Villains were working with Chisaki. We don't know if that previous attack and the arson had anything to do with it. Sources say that they were trying to get each other's attention," Aizawa explained. "Really? But then, I'm telling you because I thought you would like to know, not that you have to try and solve it." Midoriya seemed to consider the statement for a moment. "Shouldn't I be in trouble for everything?" Aizawa patted Midoriya's arm. "This time, I think you have faced punishment enough. Midoriya remembered everything, and for the first time, he didn't want to. He remembered waking up. He remembered smashing Aizawa-sensei's face. He remembered nearly knocking out Amajiki. He remembered how he attacked Uraraka. He remembered endangering all of them by breaking the ground open. He remembered how he fought against his friends. He remembered how he didn't hold back any punches. He remembered how he utterly ruined the dorm building. He remembered the scream when he nearly broke Yaoyorozu's arm. He remembered the sound as he smashed Ida's head against the concrete. He remembered how he crashed Zero's back against the wall. He remembered how he crushed Kaminari against the ground. He remembered how he could have killed every single one of them. He remembered how he nearly did. He didn't want any sympathy or kindness. He wanted them to hate him, to be furious at him for what he had done. He didn't want their forgiveness because he truly believed that there was no way he deserved it. Aizawa-sensei did his best to ensure him that it was fine, that it was going to be fine. But Midoriya couldn't help but sit there and think about how much all of his friends must hate him, how they must have been lying to Aizawa-sensei regarding how they felt. So with all of this, it was no surprise that he burst into tears upon seeing Ida enter his hospital room. "Ah, Midoriya. I am glad to see that you are awake." Ida greeted in his usual friendly manner. Midoriya didn't understand. How could Ida be so relaxed and calm around him when he had the bandages around his head as proof of what he had done to him? "Teach said that we should wait, but that's no fun," Kaminari said, scooting into the room from behind Ida. Midoriya watched in horror through his tears as others poured into the room. Zero, Uraraka, Mina, Shinso, and Kacchin. "Hey, you remember what the nurse said?" Ida shouted, turning to reprimand them all as they swarmed the room. "We have to be quick," Uraraka explained to Midoriya, smiling. "We got told you're only allowed 2 visitors at a time." "But we are suckers for breaking rules," Zero joked, nudging Kaminari in the ribs who winched a little. "And we all wanted to see you." Mina cheered, clapping her hands. Midoriya looked on with shock. He didn't understand, he really didn't. He was expecting screaming and anger, not kindness and familiarity. They were all acting like he hadn't caused the injuries that left some of them in the hospital with him. "Are you just going to keep F&G crying, Deku?" Kacchin yelled, arms crossed, standing at the end of his bed. His eyes were squinted and he looked set off, but it was no different to usual. "I don't understand," Midoriya whimpered, trying to wipe some of the tears away. It hurt to do so though, his face feeling bruised, and it just caused him to cry more. "How can you want to be in the same room as me? Making everything about you." Kacchin screamed, grabbing onto the railings of the bed. "Bakugu! No. Maybe some of us wanted to see you. Maybe some of us needed to know that you're lame but was okay, you shitty nerd." Kacchin looked like he was 2 seconds away from climbing into the bed and punching Midoriya. Alright? What do you mean?" Midoriya asked, looking around to the others. "Well, we did a bit of a number on you, and you were already in quite a state when you arrived," Zero explained, leaning his arm on Kaminari's shoulder. But you were just trying to defend yourself from me. I shouldn't have even touched you. This is all my fault." "Deku," Uraraka rested her hand on his leg for comfort, but he shook it off. He couldn't take the kindness. "You can't be nice to me, it's not right." "Dude," Kaminari said, "we are fine." He said each word with such conviction, and his signature smile didn't leave his face. "This is what we train for." Zero joyfully added on. "Yeah, remember we are training to be heroes." Mina cheered. "And that means helping out your friends when they need you no matter the risk. And if that means Bakugu smashing your head in, I'm sure he would be happy to do it any time." Shinso spoke up from his place at the back of the crowd. "Shinso!" Mina laughed in mock surprise. "It's true," Shinso smiled. Kacchin just growled at the statement, which proved that he probably agreed with it. "Midoriya, this is just proof that I need to get stronger." Ida added. "Yeah." Kaminari cheered, knocking Zero's arm off of him. "Consider it like an intense surprise training session." This time when Uraraka placed her hand on his leg, he didn't shove it off. He could feel himself get overwhelmed with emotion, with pain and joy. We are just glad that you are okay, Mina said, smiling at him. You shouldn't have to be, he mumbled into his hand that he was using to shield his face. He wasn't crying anymore, but he couldn't control the hot flush he felt. I hurt you, I shouldn't have any of your worry. Oi! Kachin shouted, causing him to look up in surprise. If you are going to continue with the self-deprecation bullshit, then I will beat your butt into the ground again. Kachin! Midoriya whined. He's secretly honored that he was the first one you recognized, Mina teased. Oh god, he did remember that, though he supposed it only made sense considering how long they had known each other. I'm gonna roast your face. Kachin screamed, swinging for Mina, who just stepped out of the way laughing. See, he's embarrassed. Kaminari joked, poking Kachin as he stumbled past. Kachin looked moments from exploding, but he simply growled and mumbled to himself as he took place near the door, making it obvious that he was done and wanted to leave. Thank you for stopping me, Midoriya said, looking around the room at all of them. That's on Shinso, Siro explained, pointing over to where he was standing. It was thanks to his quirk we could stop you. Midoriya looked at Shinso and, as genuinely as he could, said, Thank you. Shinso awkwardly rubbed the back of his head, unable to stop the smile on his face. I'm glad my quirk could help. This sparked the others into commenting and mentioning how great it actually was, and how it became the perfect situation to showcase what it could do. It all just caused Shinso to blush more. Midoriya would have usually laughed along, but he couldn't bring himself to do so, yet. He did smile at the scene though. He didn't deserve those people as his friends, he couldn't help but think. He truly didn't. But somehow he would make it up to all of them. The past 2 months had been a mess since discovering his new quirk, and he regrets all of the pain that it caused for everyone else. But ultimately he felt so honored to be alive. Midoriya Izuku is someone great. Everyone who ever met him knew that and could say so confidently. He is so selfless, so caring, and so kind to everyone he meets even if they don't deserve it. He is All Might's successor, which means nothing to most, but so much to him. He is going to be something so wonderful that the world needs. He's going to be a hero. Because Midoriya Izuku is alive. And there is now no changing that.